The Hawaiian Islands are a living testament to the human spirit of exploration and adaptation. Long before the first European ship appeared on the horizon, Polynesian voyagers had journeyed across the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean to establish a vibrant civilization here. Their mastery of navigation, their rich culture, and their deep connection to the land shaped Hawaii into a unique and thriving society. The story of pre-contact Hawaii is one of cultural brilliance, resilience, and harmony with nature. It has a tale that resonates even today as we reflect on the incredible journeys our ancestors undertook to settle this remote archipelago. Hawaii is not just a tropical paradise. It's a place forged by fire and shaped by waves. Each island tells a story of volcanic activity, of earth and water in constant flux. These islands emerged from the ocean floor, sculpted by molten rock and cooled into the majestic landscapes we see today. It's a land of contrasts, from the snow-capped peaks of Mauna Kea to the lush rainforests of the windward side. And yet, despite these differences, each island shares a common thread of beauty and biodiversity. The Hawaiian Islands are home to some of the rarest plants and animals on the planet. Their isolation allowed species to evolve unique traits found nowhere else. The nene, a type of duck, the Hawaiian hoary bat, and the numerous endemic plants are just a few examples. This unique ecosystem was not just a source of sustenance, but also a key part of their religious beliefs. For the Hawaiians, the land was not merely owned. It was cherished, respected, and understood as a living entity. Their understanding of the natural world was so profound that they developed a system of resource management. It was both sustainable and spiritually grounded. The concept of Aina, which encompasses land, nature, and homeland, highlights this deep connection. The ancient Hawaiians didn't just exploit their resources, they lived in harmony with them. This included careful fishing practices, sustainable farming methods, and a deep respect for the balance of the ecosystem. Their reverence for nature is reflected in their myths and legends, which often personified natural elements. Pele, the fire goddess, and her sister Namaka Koka'ai, the water goddess, are perhaps the most well-known. Their mythical battles and alliances explain the shifting landscapes, the eruptions, and the rains. In this isolated paradise, the Hawaiians created a social structure that mirrored the order they saw in nature. Society was hierarchical, a reflection of the belief that the islands themselves were structured. At the top were the ali'i, the chiefs, who were believed to be closer to the gods. Below them were the maka yanana, the commoners, who performed the essential tasks of the society. And at the bottom were the kaua, the outcasts, who were separated from the main societal structure due to certain restrictions or transgressions. However, this hierarchy wasn't rigid. It was fluid, allowing for social mobility based on one's actions and contributions. The heart of Hawaiian society beat to the rhythm of religion. The ancient Hawaiians were deeply spiritual people. Their religion was a tapestry woven with beliefs in gods, spirits, and a profound connection to the natural world. Unlike many other religions, there was no single supreme being. Instead, a pantheon of gods presided over various aspects of life. Cain, the creator god, Lono, the god of peace and fertility, and Ku, the god of war, were among the most revered. These gods weren't distant, all-powerful beings. They were seen as active participants in the lives of the Hawaiians, influencing everything from the weather to the success of a fishing trip. Every aspect of life was permeated with religious significance. The heiau, or temples, were the focal points of their worship. They were not grand structures, but rather open-air areas where rituals and ceremonies were performed. These rituals weren't just acts of worship. They were a way of communicating with the gods, ensuring their favor and seeking their intervention in everyday matters. The kapu, or taboos, were another manifestation of their religious beliefs. These were rules, restrictions, and prohibitions that governed every aspect of life. They dictated what food could be eaten, how people should behave, and even the routes one could take through the islands. The Kapu system, though seemingly rigid, aimed to maintain order and balance in society. It was a way of living in harmony with the gods and the natural world. It's important to remember that the ancient Hawaiians weren't a monolithic society. There were variations in beliefs and practices across the different islands. But this diversity was part of the richness of their culture. Their religion wasn't just about rituals and taboos. It was about living in tune with the rhythms of nature, with the blessings and challenges it brought. It was a way of life that not only sustained their spiritual well-being, but also shaped every facet of their existence. As the sun set over the horizon, casting long shadows across the islands, the Hawaiians gathered together. They shared stories around the flickering light of the hearth, tales of gods and heroes that had shaped their beliefs and their history. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were a means of transmitting knowledge, values, and traditions. Each story carried a lesson, a moral, or an explanation for the world around them. This oral tradition kept their history alive, their culture vibrant, and their identity strong. Music filled the Hawaiian nights. Instruments like the ukulele, the aipu heke, and the pahu resonated with rhythms that echoed the heartbeat of the islands. Dance was another essential art form, expressing stories, emotions, and beliefs. From the hula, with its graceful movements and poetic chants, to the more vigorous war dances that celebrated strength and bravery. The arts in pre-contact Hawaii were more than just performances. They were a celebration of life, a way of communicating with the gods, and a tool for preserving cultural heritage. The ancient Hawaiians were not just spectators of life. They were active participants, shaping their environment and expressing themselves through every aspect of their culture. Their religion, their social structure, and their arts were not isolated practices. They were integral parts of a way of life that thrived in harmony with the unique environment of the Hawaiian Islands. Life in pre-contact Hawaii was a testament to the human spirit, its ability to not only survive, but thrive in one of the most remote and challenging environments on Earth. Their isolation had fostered a society that was self-sufficient, culturally rich, and deeply connected to the natural world. They were masters of their environment, not exploiters. They understood the delicate balance that sustained their way of life and respected the rhythms of nature. They were storytellers, keeping their history and values alive through oral traditions and performing arts. And they were spiritual, finding divinity in every aspect of their existence. As we delve deeper into the history of Hawaii, it's crucial to understand that these islands were not a passive part of the Pacific. They were an active force, shaping their own destiny. The ancient Hawaiians stand as an example of a society living in harmony with itself and its environment, a beacon of cultural richness in the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. However, the arrival of Europeans was a pivotal moment, marking the beginning of a new chapter in Hawaiian history. Contact with the outside world would bring about significant changes, both positive and negative, that would profoundly shape the course of the island's future. Stay tuned to explore further. In January of 1863, King Kamehameha V died without any surviving legitimate children. The throne passed to his sister, Princess Liliuokalani, who was the last monarch of the Hawaiian kingdom. Her reign would be tumultuous. She'd face down rebellions, natural disasters, economic recessions, and a smallpox epidemic. But her greatest challenge would be resisting the long campaign for annexation by the United States. After the death of Kamehameha I, his son Lehaleho became King Kamehameha II. Almost immediately, the kingdom experienced massive cultural shifts. When Lehaleho came to power, he was only 24 years old, and he was surrounded by a group of high-ranking women known as the Makani, which translates to intimate associates. Among them was Queen Ka'ayumanu, Kamehameha's favorite wife and powerful advisor. The young king had already demonstrated a willingness to defy Hawaiian tradition, and Kahumanu encouraged him to go even further. Together, they set about dismantling the kapu system, a complex web of religious restrictions that had guided Hawaiian society since ancient times. For centuries, the kapu system had enforced rigid social hierarchy, regulated daily life, and dictated strict gender roles. Men were forbidden to eat with women or touch certain parts of their body, lest it defile them. Women were barred from fishing and from holding land in their own right. Adultery was severely punished. Loot, pork, and the bonito fish were all kapu, meaning forbiddens. The kapu system was maintained by a class of enforcers called na kahu, whose job it was to spy on others and report any infractions to the chiefs. But now, in the early 1800s, with the kapu system gone, men and women could mix freely and easily break the law. Food once deemed forbiddens could now be eaten together, and pigs could finally be raised on the islands. Temples were destroyed. Religious practices were banned. Dramatic as these changes may seem, they wouldn't have been possible without the support of the Hawaiian nobility, a class that had previously benefited immensely from the kapu system. Many chiefs were now eager to acquire land and property in their own right, free from the restrictions of traditional land tenure. For the average Hawaiian, however, life was more complicated. On the one hand, the kapu system was gone and a greater degree of personal freedom ensued. On the other hand, people were still subject to British and American laws and missionaries, now considered many aspects of Hawaiian culture sinful. Some Hawaiians welcomed the changes and embraced Christianity, while others resisted. Throughout the islands, Hawaiians were drawn to the hula dancing, feasting, and drumming of the old ways. But under the threat of arrest and punishment, those gatherings became less frequent, and soon they were effectively banned. The timing of these sweeping changes could not have been more consequential. Just a year later, in 1820, the first Christian missionaries from New England arrived, led by the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions, or the ABCFM. These missionaries would have an outsized impact on Hawaiian history. Their arrival marked a significant shift in Hawaii's trajectory. The missionaries brought a written Hawaiian alphabet, schools, churches, and a fierce belief in moral discipline. Within months of their arrival, they set up printing presses, published the first newspaper in Hawaiian, and opened schools where Hawaiian children were taught to read and write. By mid-century, Hawaii had one of the highest literacy rates in the world. But alongside education came cultural repression. Traditional hula dancing was banned. Hawaiian gods were demonized, and Western dress and customs became symbols of civilization. Hawaiian royals like Lehaliho and his sister embraced parts of this change, especially education. But it came at the cost of their cultural identity. The missionary children didn't just preach. They also started acquiring land, forming plantations, and entering business. These missionary sons would eventually become the economic elite of Hawaii. By the mid-1800s, the Kingdom of Hawaii was recognized as a sovereign nation by the U.S., Britain, and France. It had a constitution, foreign embassies, and a functioning government. But behind the facade of sovereignty, pressures mounted. The sugar industry boomed, and American planters gained more land and power. They pressured Hawaiian rulers to grant trade deals that favored U.S. interests. In the meantime, foreigners also lobbied for laws that gave them voting rights and reduced taxes on exports. By the mid-century, only 40% of Hawaiians were native-born. The rest were made up of immigrants from China, the Philippines, Portugal, Japan, Korea, Puerto Rico, Australia, and the United States. As the native Hawaiian population shrank devastated by diseases like smallpox and measles, foreigners filled the power gap. The monarchy was still technically in charge, but real control began slipping away. The kingdom was caught between the allure of its rich cultural heritage and the pressures to modernize and align itself with Western ideals. In 1874, a devastating tsunami struck, causing widespread destruction and claiming numerous lives. The royal family and many nobles perished, leaving the crown to King Kalakaua. Despite facing these challenges head-on, Kalakaua found himself under increasing pressure to meet the demands of the growing non-Hawaiian population. Foreigners had long chafed at the restrictions imposed by the Kapu system, restrictions that even the post-Kapu Hawaiian government continued to uphold. They pushed for political reform that would give them more say in how Hawaii was governed. Meanwhile, the Hawaiian economy was heavily reliant on the lucrative sugar industry, which faced uncertain futures due to fluctuating market prices and competition from other producers. The situation was further complicated by Kalakaua's progressive policies, including the introduction of a constitution that granted limited voting rights to some native Hawaiians, and the construction of public infrastructure like roads and schools. These measures, while well-intentioned, only fueled resentment among those who felt excluded from the political process and the economic gains of the sugar industry. In 1887, American and European business leaders forced King Kalakaua to sign the Bayonet Constitution, officially titled the Constitution of the Kingdom of Hawaii. It stripped the monarchy of much of its power and disenfranchising most native Hawaiians. The new constitution vested political power in the hands of a small group of white business owners, giving them disproportionate influence over the government and its policies. This shift in power dynamics led to a series of protests and demonstrations by native Hawaiians who felt marginalized and disenfranchised by the new regime. However, these calls for reform were met with a violent crackdown by the pro-annexation forces, solidifying the dominance of the white elite and cementing the kingdom's subordination to foreign interests. By the end of the 19th century, the Hawaiian kingdom was a fragile shadow of what it once was, still legally sovereign, but under immense pressure from foreign interests. Its people had seen their religion destroyed, their population decimated, their culture suppressed, and their land increasingly controlled by outsiders. As the Hawaiian monarchy teetered on the brink of collapse, a pivotal figure emerged, Queen Lili Ukulani. Thrust into power following the unexpected death of her brother, King Kalakaua, Lili Ukulani found herself at the helm of a kingdom, grappling with profound challenges. The seeds of discontent, sown by decades of unequal treatment of native Hawaiians, had grown into a potent force, threatening the very fabric of Hawaiian society. Facing mounting pressure from both internal and external forces, the Queen's task was nothing short of navigating a precarious path toward preserving her nation as sovereignty and identity. The narrative of the Hawaiian kingdom's demise is often told through the lens of external forces, with native Hawaiians relegated to the sidelines as passive victims of circumstance. This narrative minimizes the agency and resilience of the Hawaiian people and obscures the historical context that shaped their struggle for self-determination. Instead, we can approach this history through a lens that centers the experiences and perspectives of native Hawaiians, recognizing their agency, their strength, and their ongoing efforts to shape their own destinies. By doing so, we can gain a deeper understanding of the complexities of the Hawaiian kingdom's overthrow and the lasting impacts of colonialism in dispossession. Lili Ukulani inherited a kingdom on the brink. The previous constitution had stripped the monarchy of much of its power, and the Hawaiian people, particularly the native Hawaiians, had become increasingly disillusioned with the ruling elite. Yet despite these daunting circumstances, she remained steadfast in her commitment to her people and her country. Her journey is a testament to the indomitable spirit of leadership in the face of adversity. Under her reign, she worked tirelessly to address the grievances of her people, seeking to restore their dignity and secure their future for generations to come. At the heart of this struggle was land, the very foundation of Hawaiian culture and identity. Lili Ukulani understood that without the means to sustain themselves on their ancestral lands, the Hawaiian people would continue to be marginalized and exploited by the very forces that sought to control the kingdom. Thus, land reform emerged as a central plank of her agenda, aimed not just at redistributing land, but at restoring a sense of pride, self-sufficiency, and cultural continuity to the Hawaiian people. But her efforts were met with fierce resistance from the very forces that had orchestrated the downfall of her brother Esrain, the Committee of Safety, a group of wealthy white business owners and landowners who had benefited greatly from the status quo. Leading the charge for annexation to the U.S., they saw any attempt to redistribute land or empower native Hawaiians as a threat to their own interests, and they would stop at nothing to preserve their dominance in the kingdom. Now the stage was set for a showdown between two visions of Hawaii, one rooted in the traditions, values, and aspirations of the native Hawaiian people, the other driven by the relentless pursuit of wealth and power by the kingdom's foreign overlords. As the final battle lines were drawn, the question hung heavy in the air. Would Hawaii's rich cultural heritage be allowed to wither under the weight of external pressures, or would the indomitable spirit of aloha prevail in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds? Thank you for watching. To watch part 3 of the series, please click here. In 1778, the Hawaiian Islands were just 2 years shy of being completely uncontacted for thousands of years. That all changed when a British ship named the HMS Resolution dropped anchor in the waters off the coast of Kauai. And with it, an age of discovery and colonization began. Hey there, everyone. Hi there. So we've talked a lot about the age of discovery and how Europeans began to explore and colonize areas of the world previously unknown to them. We've talked about Christopher Columbus and Ferdinand Magellan, but there are so many other explorers who helped make sense of our world. You might be surprised to learn that before Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope and established a direct sea route to India, a Portuguese explorer named Pedro Alvarez Cabral reached the South American coast in 1500, nearly 28 years before da Gama's journey. The Portuguese started exploring the African coast way back in the 1400s and actually had traders in India long before Vasco da Gama. There is so much that happens outside of the narrative of one man finding the Americas, and we're going to talk about some of that today. So let's get into it. For centuries, the Hawaiian Islands remained isolated, untouched by the empires rising and falling across Europe and Asia. But that changed in the late 18th century when sails appeared on the horizon. These were not canoes or familiar outrigger vessels. They were massive wooden ships carrying men from a world unknown to the Hawaiian people. In 1778, the British explorer Captain James Cook arrived in the Pacific, sailing aboard the HMS Resolution and the HMS Discovery. Cook had already mapped the coasts of New Zealand and Australia. Now he was searching for the fabled Northwest Passage, a northern route linking the Pacific to the Atlantic. But what he found instead would forever alter the history of Hawaii. Captain Cook made his first Hawaiian landfall on the island of Kauai at Waimea Bay in January 1778. The Hawaiians who saw him approach were astonished. They'd never seen such massive vessels or pale-skinned men. To many, these newcomers seemed divine, possibly even gods. Cook and his crew were initially welcomed. The Hawaiians offered food, water, and assistance. They were eager to trade. In return, Cook offered iron nails, tools, beads, and fabrics. The Hawaiians quickly realized the value of iron, and a thriving exchange began. For the Hawaiians, this was not submission, but hospitality, a demonstration of their own prestige. Cook observed the island's beauty, the order of Hawaiian society, and their agricultural sophistication. He documented the cultivation of taro and breadfruit, the care with which fish ponds were managed, and the grace of the hula dancers. It was clear that the Hawaiian kingdom was not a primitive place. It was a highly organized, self-sustaining society. When Cook returned to Hawaii later that year in 1779, his timing was unusual. He landed at Kailakakua Bay on the Big Island during the Makahiki Festival, a sacred time of peace and tribute to the god Lono. Remarkably, Cook's ships, adorned with white sails and flags, resembled the depictions of Lano's arrival in Hawaiian tradition. Some Hawaiians interpreted his return as the fulfillment of prophecy. They showered Cook and his men with offerings. Chiefs greeted him with reverence. However, this deification was not universal. Some Hawaiians, particularly high-ranking alii, remained skeptical. Others welcomed the gifts and knowledge Cook offered, but never lost their cultural footing. Tensions soon rose. The longer the Englishmen stayed, the more burdensome they became. Cook's men took resources, violated Kapu rules, and occasionally mistreated locals. In response, thefts began occurring from both sides. In February 1779, a small skiff was stolen from Cook's ships. He attempted to take Kalani Gipu-U, a ruling chief of the Big Island, as a hostage to retrieve it. This act was a grave offense in Hawaiian society. Violence erupted. In the chaos, Captain James Cook was killed on the shores of Kelakeua Bay. His death shocked both the British and the Hawaiians. While the English retreated, the Hawaiians carefully handled Cook's remains according to their traditions. Some body parts were returned to his crew. Others were honored in religious rituals. While Cook was the first European to die in Hawaii, he was certainly not the last. What followed was an influx of settlers from across the globe, including Europeans, Chinese immigrants, and others. And while Cook is largely considered a hero in the UK, he is viewed very differently in Hawaii. So why do we have this difference of opinion? Well, let's take a look at the history of Captain James Cook. James Cook was born in Great Ayton, England in 1708. He joined the Royal Navy at 13, and by 1764 was promoted to lieutenant. During the 7 Years' War, he was assigned to survey the coast of Newfoundland and Labrador. This work revealed the potential riches of the sea and inspired his interest in exploration. Following his time surveying the coast, he was assigned to find and chart the southern coast of New Zealand and Australia. He found both places uninhabited, and after completing his mission, retired from naval service in 1772. However, his retirement was short-lived. In 1773, the British Admiralty recalled him to command a mission to the Pacific. Its purpose: find the Northwest Passage and circumnavigate the globe. Cook accepted the challenge and set sail in 1776 with his two ships, the HMS Resolution and the HMS Discovery. When Cook discovered Hawaii, he did not realize that the islands were not actually one continuous landmass. Rather, he thought that they were part of a larger landmass, which he named the Sandwich Islands. He charted the coastline of each island, measured their latitudes and longitudes, and recorded their natural features and plant life. He encountered various Polynesian cultures on his travels, and the Hawaiians in particular impressed him. He noted their physical prowess, mental acuity, and social organization. Cook also observed the Hawaiians' deep connection to the land. They cultivated crops, herded animals, and fished sustainably. They understood the delicate balance of the ecosystem and respected it. Cook recognized that the Hawaiians' way of life was vastly different from that of Europeans. They did not have money or engage in trade. They lived according to the rhythms of nature and valued community over individualism. Despite their differences, Cook developed a fascination with the Hawaiian people. He learned their language, customs, and beliefs. He studied their art, music, and dance, and marveled at their ability to navigate the ocean using only the stars and the currents. Cook was fascinated by the ancient Hawaiian creation chant called the Kumulipo, which tells the story of the island's creation and the genealogy of the Hawaiian people. He saw the chant as evidence of a sophisticated culture that had developed over centuries without European influence. Cook was also intrigued by the Hawaiian concept of mana, which refers to the spiritual power or life force that flows through all living things. He believed that the Hawaiians' deep connection to the land and their respect for nature were rooted in their understanding of mana. Today, Cook's legacy is a complicated one. On the one hand, He was a brilliant navigator and explorer who charted much of the Pacific Ocean and made significant contributions to our understanding of the world. He was also a scientist and natural historian who documented the flora and fauna of the islands and collected specimens for European museums. On the other hand, Cook was also responsible for bringing European diseases to the islands, which devastated the native population. He was also involved in the slave trade and in the capture of Hawaiians to be used as slaves in the Pacific. It's important to remember that Cook was a product of his time. In the 18th century, European explorers were often motivated by a desire to expand their empire and to exploit the resources of other cultures. Cook was no exception. However, Cook also had a sense of wonder and curiosity about the world that led him to make some important discoveries and to document the cultures he encountered. So what do you think? Do you think Captain Cook was a hero or a villain? Let me know in the comments below. Also, thank you to all of our supporters. If you would like to support us, please check the link below. We'll see you next time. Western contact did not just bring goods and germs, it brought ideas. As Hawaiians adopted tools, guns, and even Western clothing, deeper shifts followed. Missionaries would later impose Christianity and suppress native traditions. But even before their arrival, Western customs began seeping in. The alii class, especially younger nobles, began adopting foreign practices. Some learned English, some wore trousers and jackets. Many grew interested in ships, cannons, and muskets as tools of power. Meanwhile, Hawaiian women were often involved with Western sailors, both through relationships and sex work. Hawaiian society did not view sexuality with the same shame or control as European cultures, but the consequences, especially disease, were tragic. The ruling chiefs began to see the value of Western alliances. Kamehameha the Great, who would soon unify the islands, welcomed foreign advisors and embraced Western weapons. He understood that to control the islands and defend them, Hawaii would need more than spears and canoes. He took in Isaac Davis and John Young, two foreigners who were marooned in Hawaii, but became trusted military and diplomatic advisors. They trained Hawaiian forces, helped acquire cannons and muskets, and advised on foreign affairs. The balance of power began to shift. Hawaiians still ruled their lands, but foreigners were becoming part of their governance. The line between ally and occupier blurred. In 1820, the first American Protestant missionaries arrived from New England aboard the brig Thaddeus. They were shocked to discover that the ancient Hawaiian religion had already been abolished. Queen Ka'ayumanu and King Kamehameha II had overthrown the Kapu system just months earlier. To the missionaries, this was divine timing. They saw a heathen people suddenly freed from false gods, ready for the Bible. But what they didn't understand was that Hawaiians were not spiritually empty, they were spiritually unmoored. The missionaries, serious, puritanical, and deeply devoted, quickly set up churches, schools, and printing presses. They developed a written Hawaiian language and translated the Bible. Within decades, a new cultural wave was overtaking the islands. Christianity, hula was banned. Sacred chants were forbidden. Children were taught to cover their bodies, avoid pagan traditions, and speak proper English. Many alii embraced this new religion, some sincerely, others as a political necessity. By the mid-19th century, Hawaii had fully entered the geopolitical spotlight. The British and French both sought to claim influence over the islands. The EU saw Hawaii as a future naval base and economic outpost. In 1843, British forces briefly seized control of Hawaii during the Paulet Affair, but the monarchy was restored thanks to British Admiral Richard Thomas, who declared the seizure unauthorized. This incident led King Kamehameha III to proclaim, "Ua mo ke'ea, o kajina I kapono." The life of the land is preserved in righteousness. This phrase remains the state motto of Hawaii today, but the message was clear. sovereignty was under constant threat. Foreign powers now knew Hawaii's strategic value. The American Civil War was decades away, but eyes were already on Pearl Harbor. The seeds of occupation had been planted not through a single invasion, but through disease, trade, belief, and diplomacy. By the late 1800s, Hawaii was no longer the isolated paradise it had once been. Its people were caught in a clash of worlds between traditional chants and Protestant hymns, between alii robes and missionary collars, between the gods of the mountains and the creeds of New England churches. But while the kingdom adapted, the pressure continued to mount. Foreign businessmen were growing rich. The native population was declining, and the monarchy stood on increasingly shaky ground. The final blow came from an unlikely source: sugar. For centuries, sugar had been a luxury good, a treat for special occasions. Then in the 1700s, British colonists in the Caribbean devised new technologies, and large-scale plantations could produce and ship massive amounts of sugar at a profit. Soon, every major colonial power was growing sugar. But by the early 1800s, sugar prices collapsed due to oversupply. Planters needed new markets and cheap labor. Enter Hawaii. The Hawaiian Islands offered a unique opportunity: a tropical climate, volcanic soil, and most importantly, an untapped workforce. Missionaries had outlawed slavery, so planters turned to the indigenous population, offering work contracts that often resembled bondage. Wages were low and working conditions were brutal. But these plantations quickly became the economic engine of Hawaii. Sugar exports surged. Wealthy landowners gained immense power. And when the mainland use lowered tariffs on Hawaiian sugar in 1876, the islands became a sugar bowl for America. Profits soared. Plantations expanded. But this prosperity came at a cost. Native Hawaiians were pushed off their lands, forced into low-wage labor, or simply bought out. As sugar plantations spread across the islands, they attracted more and more foreign settlers, many of whom were from China. By the 1880s, racial tensions were high. White business leaders feared the growing Chinese population and created a new political party to protect their interests, the Committee of Safety. In 1893, they orchestrated a coup, overthrowing the Hawaiian monarchy and establishing a provisional government. Queen Liliuokalani, the last monarch of Hawaii, tried to regain the throne, but she was forced to abdicate. The Republic of Hawaii was born, but its days were numbered. Sugar planters wanted statehood in the U.S., which seemed unlikely while the islands remained racially divided. A compromise emerged: annex Hawaii as a territory and solve the racial problem by disenfranchising everyone but white business interests. In 1898, the U.S. did just that. Hawaii became a U.S. territory. Non-white residents were barred from voting, and the sugar barons who led the coup became immensely wealthy. Today, the story of Hawaii is remembered in different ways. For many Americans, Hawaii is a vacation destination, a tropical paradise full of surfing, luau's, and Polynesian culture. Hollywood films and TV shows have reinforced this image. But for native Hawaiians, the history is much more complex. They remember the overthrow of their monarchy, the dispossession of their lands, and the introduction of foreign diseases that devastated their population. Their history is one of resilience in the face of enormous challenges. Over the past 2 centuries, native Hawaiians have fought to preserve their language, their culture, and their identity. They have also worked to address the social and economic issues that continue to affect their communities, such as high rates of poverty and health disparities. Today, native Hawaiians make up about 10% of the state's population. They continue to be a vibrant and integral part of Hawaiian society. In recent years, there has been a growing movement to recognize and understand the true history of Hawaii, including the painful legacy of colonialism. This movement has led to changes in the curriculum in Hawaiian schools, as well as greater efforts to preserve and revitalize the Hawaiian language. Hawaiians are still fighting for recognition of their rights and self-determination. The overthrow of the monarchy is still considered a traumatic event in Hawaiian history, and there are ongoing efforts to restore the monarchy and return the land to native Hawaiians. Despite these challenges, native Hawaiians continue to thrive. They have made significant contributions to the arts, politics, and culture, and they continue to be an important voice in shaping the future of Hawaii. When we think about colonization, we often picture a single moment of invasion and occupation. But in Hawaii, the story is much more complicated. It was a process that unfolded over several decades, driven by a combination of factors. Disease, trade, belief, and diplomacy all played a role. It was a gradual shift in power that ultimately resulted in the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy. But the story doesn't end there. It's a story of resilience, of resistance, and of the ongoing struggle for recognition and self-determination. It's a reminder that the history of colonization is not just about violence and oppression, but also about the courage of those who fight for freedom and justice. If you enjoyed this episode and want to learn more about underrepresented histories like this one, check out the series on our channel. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Alright, this is really cool. Imagine if someone from the Middle Ages got sent back to like 2000 and just started preaching at everyone. The fact is, that's basically exactly what happened here. Welcome to my channel. Today, we're looking at how missionaries tried to turn Hawaii into New England. If you enjoy weird history and learning about underreported stories that don't get much attention, then stay tuned for more content. In 1820, a small ship named the Thaddeus docked off the coast of Kailua Kona on the Big Island of Hawaii. Aboard were 14 passengers missionaries from New England, most from the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions. They had sailed for 5 months from Boston, determined to save the souls of what they saw as a heathen people. These men and women were not adventurers. They were teachers, preachers, doctors, and farmers. Their names would soon become famous across the islands: Hiram Bingham, Asa Thurston, Lucy Thurston, Elisha Loomis. They brought with them Bibles, reading primers, printing presses, and a vision to remake Hawaiian society in the image of Christian New England. But what they didn't know as they stepped ashore was that Hawaii had already begun to change. Just months earlier, Queen Ka'ahumanu, a powerful regent and favorite wife of Kamehameha the Great, had orchestrated the abolition of the Kapu system. Temples had been destroyed, idols burned, and ancient laws discarded. This spiritual void provided fertile ground for new beliefs, and the missionaries were ready to plant. At first, the missionaries were cautious. They could not assume royal favor. But within a few months, Queen Ka'ahumanu became intrigued by the Christian teachings, especially the emphasis on monogamy, modesty, and literacy. She converted and was baptized in 1825. Her conversion signaled to the kingdom that Christianity was more than a foreign novelty. It was becoming the faith of the ruling elite. Soon, other alii followed. King Kamehameha II traveled to England and died there of measles. His successor, Kamehameha III, was a child at the time, and Ka'ahumanu continued to guide the kingdom. Under her leadership, Christian morality was imposed across the islands with fierce zeal. The missionaries now had the power to reshape an entire culture, and they did so swiftly. One of the first major achievements of the missionaries was the creation of a written Hawaiian language. Previously, all knowledge in Hawaii genealogies, chants, prayers, laws was passed down orally. With the help of Hawaiian scholars, the missionaries developed an alphabet using Latin script. By 1822, the first Hawaiian printing press was operational. Within a few years, the Bible was translated into Hawaiian, and literacy campaigns spread rapidly. Reading became a cornerstone of the new religious and social order. By the 1840s, Hawaii had one of the highest literacy rates in the Pacific and even the world. Hawaiian children were reading and writing fluently. Newspapers flourished. Laws were codified in writing, and all of it reflected a blend of Western order and Hawaiian language. But beneath the surface, the power of oral tradition, spiritual storytelling, and ancient knowledge began to erode. Missionary influence went far beyond converting Hawaiians to Christianity. It seeped into every aspect of their lives, reshaping traditions and values. The missionaries aimed to transform not just people's spirituality, but their entire way of life. In the process, they inadvertently created some of the same cultural conflicts that continue to this day. Here's a crazy fact. At one point, the King of Hawaii had 7 wives. Honestly, that doesn't seem that crazy to me. But when you consider the fact that missionaries wanted to impose monogamy on the Hawaiian people, yeah, it makes sense. The missionaries' push for monogamy deeply affected Hawaiian culture. Before their arrival, the concept of marriage was more fluid. Hawaiian society had no formal marriage ceremony. Courtship often involved multiple partners, and there was no prohibition against having multiple spouses. Missionaries viewed polygamy as sinful and set about changing this practice. Their campaign was led by Reverend Hiram Bingham, who argued that it was morally superior and aligned with the biblical ideal. To enforce this, they refused to perform marriages unless they were monogamous. This stance was personally hurtful to many Hawaiians, especially women, who had multiple partners as part of their tradition. The missionaries also rejected traditional Hawaiian customs like the hula, which they deemed too revealing for women. This suppression of traditional dance forms led to the loss of a significant part of Hawaiian cultural expression. The hula wasn't just entertainment. It was a way to transmit history, values, and stories. Its suppression by the missionaries resulted in a significant gap in cultural transmission. The missionaries' goal was to replace Hawaiian culture with their own. They discouraged native practices, including the wearing of the malo and the paiu, traditional garments worn by men and women respectively. Instead, they promoted Western clothing like dresses and trousers. For Hawaiians, this meant abandoning clothing that had been part of their identity for generations in favor of attire that was unfamiliar and sometimes uncomfortable. Missionaries attempted to eradicate traditional Hawaiian religion by denouncing it as false and demonic. They targeted priests, kupuna, and any symbols of native worship. Many Hawaiians who practiced their traditions were harassed, sometimes physically, and faced social ostracization. This systematic attack led to the destruction of many sacred sites and the loss of countless cultural and religious artifacts. The missionaries were particularly harsh on Hawaiian priests. They were accused of being evil, ignorant, and leading the people away from God. Priests were publicly humiliated, beaten, and sometimes put out of work. This mistreatment led to the decline of the priesthood and the loss of valuable knowledge that these priests held. The missionaries did not come to Hawaii just to convert people to Christianity. They also wanted to change the way Hawaiians interacted with their environment. They introduced new agricultural practices and livestock that dramatically altered the landscape and economy of the islands. Missionaries believed that Hawaiians were using the land in an unsustainable and wasteful manner. They introduced new crops such as wheat and vegetables, and new farming techniques that were more intensive and less in tune with the natural environment. They also brought animals such as cattle, pigs, and chickens, which not only changed the diet of the Hawaiians, but also had a devastating impact on local plants and animals. Cattle, pigs, and chickens were huge and destructive. They roamed freely, destroying crops and outcompeting native species for resources. This alteration of the landscape and introduction of foreign species had lasting impacts on Hawaii's ecosystem. But despite all this, it's important to remember that not everyone in Hawaii accepted the missionaries' teachings. Many Hawaiians continued to practice their traditional religion and resist the changes being imposed on them. The missionaries' influence, while significant, was not absolute. There was pushback, debate, and negotiation. creating a complex and often tense relationship between the missionaries and the Hawaiian people. So let's take a step back and ask why the missionaries did what they did. Missionaries were driven by a desire to spread Christianity and save souls, but also by belief in the superiority of Western culture. They genuinely felt that their way of life was better, and that Hawaiians needed to be civilized. This paternalistic attitude led to the suppression of native practices and the imposition of Western norms. Their actions, while perhaps well-intentioned from their perspective, had a devastating impact on Hawaiian culture and society. And here's the thing, even though the missionaries had a profound impact on Hawaii, they weren't the only outside force shaping its destiny. Think about the traders who arrived before them, bringing new goods and ideas, or the explorers who opened up Hawaii to the wider world. Each group, with their own motives and methods, contributed to the unique story of Hawaii. It wasn't just the missionaries who had a hand in making Hawaii what it is today. Now, it's your turn. What do you think? Were the missionaries noble idealists trying to spread the word of God, or were they cultural imperialists? Share your thoughts. And if you want to learn more about the missionaries in Hawaii, check out the additional resources. Thanks for watching. As the Hawaiian kingdom entered the 20th century, it was more closely aligned with Europe than ever before. It had representative government, widespread literacy, and a massive plantation economy run by European and American managers. It also had a well-developed infrastructure, including roads, bridges, and irrigation systems. Missionaries had come to Hawaii about 5 generations earlier, in the early 1800s, eager to convert the pagan natives to Christianity. Yet today's Hawaiians are almost entirely Christian themselves. Now, Hawaiian culture, meanwhile, is an intoxicating mix of Polynesian and European traditions. At times it seems as if Hawaii itself is a walking contradiction. Much of its beauty, prosperity, and even architecture came at the expense of the original inhabitants, who today make up less than a quarter of the population. So how does Hawaii reconcile its past? Did the missionaries completely destroy Hawaiian culture, or did something survive? The answer begins with one of the missionaries' most lasting legacies, the school system. When they arrived in the early 1800s, the islands had no schools and mass literacy was unheard of. Literacy was essential to the missionaries' work, though, so they made teaching children read and write in both Hawaiian and English a moral imperative. Churches became schools, and Ali'i supported the building of mission houses and classrooms across the islands. From these humble beginnings grew one of the most comprehensive educational systems in the Pacific. Children were taught to read and write in both Hawaiian and English, as well as basic Christian values and Bible stories. They were instructed in Western history and arithmetic, and girls were taught domestic skills like sewing, while boys were taught trades such as carpentry and farming. The missionaries believed in the inherent goodness of people and in their ability to be civilized through education. That is, they believed that Hawaiians could become like white Americans if they just learned the right values and skills. And while these schools provided valuable tools and skills, they also instilled a worldview that placed Western Christian norms at the top of a hierarchy and Hawaiian customs at the bottom. The goal was not cultural exchange, but assimilation. For example, while some missionaries initially embraced Hawaiian culture, eventually they began to view certain aspects of it as savage or demonic. Hula dancing, which had been a vehicle for storytelling and historical memory, became a target because its movements were considered too sensual. The drum used in hula, the aipu heke, was even banned because it mimicked the sound of a woman crying. Similarly, older gods were demonized as false idols, and the missionaries convinced many Hawaiians that their ancestral beliefs were the work of the devil. The missionaries succeeded in converting Hawaiians to Christianity and stamping out old religions. However, they failed to wipe out Hawaiian spirituality altogether. For many Hawaiians, Christianity easily absorbed older beliefs. In fact, some missionaries noted that the Hawaiian people seemed predisposed to converting to Christianity. Because their religion already had a strong emphasis on a supreme being and a prohibition against killing, stealing, and lying, the missionaries formally outlawed the practice of hula dancing, but it continued in private. The old gods were whispered about even as churches arose. In private homes, the stories lived on. Culture bent, but did not break. Over time, the Hawaiian kingdom changed in other ways too. It began to look more and more like Western nations. In 1831, the Honolulu Seminary opened on Maui. It became the premier school for training native Hawaiian teachers, ministers, and leaders. Early graduates included the first native Hawaiian minister and the first Hawaiian to earn a college degree. Its legacy lives on today in institutions such as the University of Hawaii. Over time, the Hawaiian kingdom began to adopt Western-style legal and political systems. In 1839, under pressure from both missionaries and foreign governments, King Kamehameha III issued the Declaration of Rights, followed by the Constitution of 1840, Hawaii's first formal constitution. The Constitution established a constitutional monarchy and created separate executive, legislative, and judicial branches. It also protected civil liberties, prohibited slavery, and codified laws based on Christian principles. The Constitution helped Hawaii gain recognition as a legitimate sovereign state, but it also formalized the growing influence of foreigners, particularly missionary descendants, in law, commerce, and politics. While the first wave of missionaries were relatively modest and religiously driven, their children and grandchildren, often called the missionary sons, had different ambitions. These second-generation settlers became business owners, lawyers, and politicians. They amassed land, developed plantations, and pushed for laws that favored their interests. They no longer sought only to convert Hawaiians. They wanted to control the islands economically and politically. In the process, they displaced Hawaiians from positions of power. For example, before the arrival of missionaries, alii or chiefs managed much of the land and made decisions about land use. But after missionaries arrived and the Hawaiian kingdom began to modernize, the alii lost power and the missionaries and their descendants took over. Family names like Castle, Cook, Dole, and Bishop became powerful. They helped establish sugar plantations, banks, and trade companies. Their churches continued to influence morality, but their businesses influenced everything else. This group would eventually play a central role in the overthrow of the monarchy and Hawaii's annexation. It wasn't until the 20th century that the damage done by the missionaries became clear, but their influence was part of a larger trend. Across the globe, missionaries often worked hand in hand with colonial powers to convert local populations to Christianity and take over their lands. As the Hawaiian kingdom entered the 20th century, it was more closely aligned with Europe than ever before. It had representative government, widespread literacy, and a massive plantation economy run by European and American managers. Yet today's Hawaiians are almost entirely Christian. Meanwhile, Hawaiian culture is an intoxicating mix of Polynesian and European traditions. At times, it seems as if Hawaii itself is a walking contradiction. Much of its beauty, prosperity, and even architecture came at the expense of the original inhabitants, who today make up less than a quarter of the population. So how does Hawaii reconcile its past? Did the missionaries completely destroy Hawaiian culture, or did something survive? In some ways, the missionaries accomplished their goal of assimilating Hawaiians into Western society. Most Hawaiians today consider themselves Christian and identify primarily as American, or Hapahaole, meaning half-white. Yet Hawaiian culture, despite efforts to eradicate it, proved resilient. Hawaiian language and customs survived in private spaces and eventually began to re-emerge in public. Schools that once exclusively taught English began incorporating Hawaiian language and history into their curriculum. In 1978, Hawaiian language classes were reinstitutionized. Students could finally learn the language their ancestors had been forced to abandon. In 1986, the Hawaiian language was recognized as an official language of the state alongside English. Today, thousands of Hawaiians speak the language proficiently, passing it down to their children and even teaching it in schools. The hula is no longer banned either. In fact, it is a celebrated symbol of the islands. It has evolved since its pre-contact form, absorbing influences from abroad, but it remains an integral part of Hawaiian life. Just as Christianity absorbed elements of older beliefs, so too did the hula. Hawaiian culture then is a dynamic and evolving thing, demonstrating incredible adaptability. Meanwhile, Hawaiians have used Western tools to defend Hawaiian rights. For example, King Kalakaua and Queen Liliuokalani passed laws to shield land ownership. After missionaries and their descendants seized most of the island's land, they and their foreign counterparts enacted tariffs on exports, including sugar, and exerted control over shipping and land access. Yet the story of Hawaii is not just one of loss. It's also a story of resistance. Groups like the Hui Hanai, led by Princess Kaiulani, fought to maintain Hawaiian sovereignty, especially after the overthrow of the monarchy in 1893. The Committee of Safety, which orchestrated the overthrow, was comprised mostly of wealthy landowners who wanted to annex Hawaii to the United States and gain control of the island's natural resources. Although the monarchy was restored for a brief time, it was clear to many that Hawaii's future lay in independence or annexation. Eventually, they would choose the latter. Today, the Hawaiian kingdom looks vastly different than it did when missionaries first arrived. It has a deep cultural and religious diversity, a thriving economy, and a complicated relationship with the United States. But its history is a reminder that cultural resilience is possible, even in the face of complete cultural erasure. Hawaiians did not simply surrender their culture. They adapted, resisted, and found ways to preserve their identity. They made their beliefs their own. They fought back against those who sought to erase them. And they never stopped telling their stories. Thank you for watching. During the first half of the 19th century, the Kingdom of Hawaii underwent dramatic changes. Perhaps the most profound shift during this era was in land ownership. In traditional Hawaiian society, land was held communally under the authority of the ali'i. There was no private land ownership, but missionaries and Westerners saw this as inefficient. In 1848, King Kamehameha III implemented the hahel, a division of lands into royal, noble, and commoner parcels. It was intended to modernize the economy, but it backfired. Most native Hawaiians did not understand the legal paperwork required to claim land. Foreigners, on the other hand, quickly registered titles and bought up vast tracts. Over the next few decades, most Hawaiian land passed out of native hands. The islands, once fed and governed by communal care of land, were now increasingly owned by sugar barons and American businessmen. By the 1840s, Hawaii had been transformed. Churches outnumbered temples. English competed with Hawaiian in the schools. Western law overlaid traditional justice. Lands were changing hands. Foreigners wielded growing power. And yet, the Hawaiian kingdom still stood. It had a king, a legislature, and global recognition. It had literate citizens, a strong economy, and cultural resilience. But the foundation was cracking. The missionaries had come with Bibles. Their sons would come with contracts, rifles, and laws. The next phase would not be a cultural conversion. It would be a hostile takeover. By the mid-19th century, Hawaii was no longer just a spiritual mission field or remote outpost. It had become a thriving agricultural economy. At the heart of this transformation was sugar. Sugarcane thrived in Hawaii's climate, and with global demand rising, the islands became a plantation paradise for ambitious American businessmen. Sugar wasn't just a crop, it was the engine of economic colonization. Starting in the 1830s, American and European settlers began establishing small sugar plantations. As the infrastructure improved, thanks to new mills, irrigation, and shipping routes, sugar exports exploded. By the 1850s, sugar was Hawaii's most important export. By the 1870s, it had transformed the social and political landscape. To grow sugar, planters needed large tracts of land, cheap labor, favorable trade conditions. All three of these requirements would bring Americans deeper into Hawaii's internal affairs, often to the detriment of native Hawaiians. The missionary sons descendants of the early Christian missionaries now shed their parents' austere lifestyles. They became sugar barons, bankers, and land magnates. Names like Castle, Cook, Dole, and Baldwin gained enormous power. These men were not content with being guests in the Kingdom of Hawaii. They wanted influence, laws that protected their investments, and control over tariffs and treaties. They joined or formed groups like the Hawaiian Sugar Planters Association, the Committee of Safety, merchant firms such as Castle and Cook, and C. Brewer and Co. They bought land often through legal manipulation and unfair purchases, and pushed native Hawaiians off ancestral territory. They built roads, mills, railroads, and ports. They also imported thousands of foreign laborers to work the plantations, altering the demographic makeup of the islands. This is a Hawaii that looks familiar, at least on the surface. Politically independent, culturally a blend of East and West, and economically dependent on agriculture. This prosperity, however, was built on significant social and environmental costs. And while the Hawaiian kingdom endured, its power was increasingly nominal. Land, labor, and laws were being appropriated by a small group of foreign landowners. The rest of the century would see them exert total control. But before we get there, let's understand how the foundations of this new Hawaii were laid in the mid-19th century. To fully grasp this pivotal period, we must look at the interests of three key groups: Native Hawaiians, missionaries, and foreign planters. We'll begin with the Native Hawaiians, particularly the alii, who traditionally held power under the old system. Now they face challenges from both tradition and foreigners. Before the arrival of Europeans, the alii derived their authority from a complex web of custom, genealogy, and personal relationships. With the introduction of Western concepts like individual land ownership and modern legal codes, these traditional practices were no longer sufficient. Yet many alii initially resisted the changes brought by the Mahahel and the influx of foreigners. They clung to the old system, viewing it as more equitable and sustainable. Figures like John Papaji, a Hawaiian statesman and landowner, tried to reconcile traditional values with Western demands. However, as time went on, some alii saw the advantages of the new system and began buying up large tracts of land. One famous example is Princess Bernice Pauahi Bishop, who amassed a significant land holding, which later became the foundation of the Bishop estate. Despite these adaptations, many alii lost much of their ancestral land and influence during this period, setting the stage for the socio-political dynamics of the late 19th century. Next, we turn to the missionaries, specifically their descendants, who had already made significant cultural and religious changes in the early part of the century. Now their children and grandchildren are taking an active role in the economic transformation of the islands. Unlike their parents, many of whom were dedicated to a life of service and simplicity, the missionary sons embraced the opportunities presented by Hawaii's new economic order. They established businesses, plantations, and financial institutions, becoming some of the most powerful figures in Hawaiian society. Prominent families like the Alexanders, the Wrights, and the Theodores played a crucial role in shaping the legal, commercial, and political landscape of Hawaii. They established schools, churches, and newspapers that promoted American values and interests. For instance, the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions continued its work, focusing on education and publishing. Figures like Jarrett P. Judd, a physician and statesman, and Lauren Thurston, a journalist and politician, became influential voices for annexation to the United States. They advocated for closer ties with America, believing it would bring greater prosperity and protection to the islands. Despite their significant contributions to Hawaii's development, the missionary sons were also criticized for their role in the socio-economic changes that marginalized native Hawaiians. Their advocacy for annexation and their business dealings often came at the expense of traditional land rights and cultural practices. Nevertheless, their influence was undeniable, and their impact on Hawaii's trajectory during this period was profound. Finally, we come to the foreign planters, individuals from Europe and the United States who came to Hawaii primarily to grow cash crops. Among them were Americans, Europeans, and a diverse mix of Asians and Pacific Islanders who were brought in as contract laborers. These groups were drawn to Hawaii by the kingdom's favorable business environment and the lucrative potential of sugar production. They established plantations, trading companies, and shipping businesses, injecting new capital and expertise into the Hawaiian economy. Prominent families like the Castles, the Cooks, and the Wrights amassed considerable wealth, transforming the socio-economic structure of the islands. The foreign planters also brought new technologies and farming practices that dramatically increased sugar production. They introduced modern milling techniques, irrigation systems, and new varieties of sugarcane. They also developed close ties with U.S. mainland markets, ensuring a steady demand and revenue stream for their crops. Despite their economic contributions, the foreign planters were often at odds with the Hawaiian government. They sought more favorable policies regarding land tenure, labor laws, and tariffs, and they were willing to use their considerable influence to achieve these goals. They formed powerful business associations, like the Hawaiian Sugar Planters Association, and exerted pressure on the monarchy to enact policies that benefited their interests. Their increasing assertiveness would lead to significant changes in the political landscape of Hawaii during the late 19th century. The interplay between these three groups, the native Hawaiians, the missionaries, and the foreign planters, set the stage for the dramatic events of the late 1800s. The seeds of change sown in the mid-19th century would blossom into full-scale transformation in the final decades of the century. The groundwork had been laid for a Hawaii that was economically vibrant but socially and politically divided. A Hawaii on the cusp of a new and uncertain future. Join us next time as we explore how the foundations of this new Hawaii were laid in the mid-19th century. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Your support helps us bring these stories to a wider audience. If you have any comments or suggestions, feel free to drop them below. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and remember, you are part of our ohana. Alright, so today, we gonna talk about the Bayonet Constitution and how it is one of the reasons why Hawaii is part of the United States today. Okay, so let's just quickly recap what happened in the last video. The sugar industry came to Hawaii around the 1830s, basically right after the missionaries left. At first, it was run by British agents, but then Americans showed up and eventually took over. To power the sugar plantations, Hawaii imported labor from China, Japan, Portugal, Korea, and the Philippines. Beginning in the 1850s, waves of immigrants signed contracts to work in harsh conditions for low pay. We'll talk more about them later, but for now, just know that life was pretty terrible for them. They worked long hours under the hot sun, did hard, brutal field work, and had to follow strict labor rules. Not only that, but many of them lived in overcrowded housing separate from the rest of Hawaiian society. Still, they brought with them their own languages, foods, customs, and religions, which would forever transform Hawaii's cultural landscape. Over time, these immigrant groups intermarried, formed tight-knit communities, and contributed richly to modern Hawaii. But during the plantation era, they were tools of profit for the white sugar planters. Meanwhile, the native Hawaiian population, once the sole stewards of the land, continued to shrink and be pushed out of positions of power. As sugar exports grew, American planters in Hawaii sought economic stability and free access to U.S. markets. Their efforts culminated in the Reciprocity Treaty of 1875, a turning point in Hawaii's semi-sovereign status. This treaty was basically an agreement signed between the Kingdom of Hawaii and the United States. Here are the main points. Allowed duty-free export of Hawaiian sugar to the U.S. In return, granted the U.S. exclusive use of Pearl Harbor. This deal massively boosted the Hawaiian sugar industry. Profits soared, plantations expanded, and American business interests became even more entrenched. But the treaty also gave the U.S. a foothold in Hawaii's internal affairs. Pearl Harbor became a strategic military asset long before formal annexation. It was the beginning of Hawaii's economic dependency on the United States. Now, all this tension and change in power led to some drama in the ruling circle. In 1874, David Kalakaua ascended to the Hawaiian throne. He was known as the Merry Monarch. He was a proud nationalist and cultural revivalist. Basically, he wanted to bring back traditional Hawaiian ways and institutions. So here's what he did. He built the Ailani Palace, the first royal residence with electric lights. He reinvigorated Hawaiian culture and language, promoted alliances with other Pacific nations, and tried to reduce U.S. dependence. In short, he wanted to assert the authority of the Hawaiian monarchy. But this wasn't exactly well received by the white business class. The Committee of Safety, the Ministry, the Lunalailo League. They feared that he was weakening the islands economically and putting Hawaii in danger. They didn't want an independent Hawaii. They wanted control. And they pressured him constantly, accusing him of corruption, overspending, and being too friendly with rival powers like Britain and Japan. In reality, Kalakaua was trying to balance his kingdom's sovereignty with the economic demands of a growing empire. But he would soon be backed into a corner. In 1887, a group of American and European residents, mostly sugar planters and businessmen, formed the Hawaiian League, a secretive political organization. With the support of an armed militia, they forced King Kalakaua to sign a new constitution at gunpoint. It became known as the Bayonet Constitution. So here are the key features. Severely limited the king's powers. Gave voting rights only to wealthy property owners. Stripped voting rights from most native Hawaiians and Asian immigrants. Shifted control to the legislature, which was now dominated by foreign interests. Basically, it took all the power from the king and gave it to white businessmen who were mostly from the mainland and had little to no connection to Hawaii. Now, Kalakaua, fearing bloodshed, signed the document under duress. The Bayonet Constitution is a significant event in Hawaiian history because it marked the turning point in the relationship between the Hawaiian monarchy and the white business class. It turned Hawaii into a puppet state ruled not by its king, but by the sugar elite. So how did this happen? Well, there are several contributing factors. First, the white business class was much wealthier and more organized than the native Hawaiians. They controlled the sugar plantations, which were the backbone of the economy, and they used their wealth and connections to build a political machine that could dominate the government. Second, the racial dynamics of the time played a big role. White Americans and Europeans were considered superior to people of color and were given more rights and privileges. For example, they could vote, own property, and run for office, while most Hawaiians and Asians were denied these basic rights. They were seen as second-class citizens. Third, the weakness of the monarchy also contributed to the overthrow. King Kalakaua was a constitutional monarch, which meant that his power was limited by the Constitution. He also faced opposition from the nobility and the clergy, who saw him as a threat to their interests. Finally, external factors also played a role. The United States was a major market for Hawaiian sugar, and the Reciprocity Treaty of 1875 gave Hawaiian sugar a big boost. This made the sugar industry very profitable and the white business class even more powerful. They also saw Hawaii as a potential gateway to the rest of the Pacific, and they wanted to secure their control over the islands. The Bayonet Constitution stripped the Hawaiian monarch of his powers and paved the way for the overthrow of the monarchy in 1893. This was a major turning point in Hawaii's history. The Constitution is a symbol of the oppression and disenfranchisement of Native Hawaiians and other people of color. It also shows how the white business class was willing to use force and coercion to achieve their goals. After the overthrow, the Republic of Hawaii was established, and soon after it was annexed by the United States. The Bayonet Constitution became part of the larger narrative of colonialism and imperialism in the Pacific. It's a reminder of the legacy of racism and inequality in Hawaii and the United States. However, despite the negative aspects of the Bayonet Constitution, it's important to note that some positive things did come out of it. For example, the Constitution did protect the rights of some Native Hawaiians and people of color to vote and hold office. It also established a system of public education that was open to all children regardless of race or ethnicity. Additionally, the Constitution did allow for some degree of self-government in Hawaii, and it did prevent the islands from being exploited by foreign powers. Overall, the Bayonet Constitution was a complex and controversial document that had both positive and negative effects on Hawaii and its people. It is a reminder that history is nuanced and that even seemingly negative events can have some positive outcomes. Alright, so I hope you learned something. If you did, please make sure to like this video. Also let me know what you think of this video and of the series in general. What do you think I should focus on? What should I cover next? Are there any topics that you think I missed or should have covered? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Mahalo. What if I told you there was a secret constitution that made it illegal for most people to vote? Worse yet, what if this constitution was written at gunpoint and imposed on an entire nation? Welcome to my channel. Today, we're going to learn about the Bayonet Constitution of Hawaii. In 1893, the American-backed overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy led to the creation of the Republic of Hawaii, which was dominated by white, wealthy landowners. To ensure their dominance, they imposed a constitution that disenfranchised Native Hawaiians from voting. We're going to do a deep dive on how this happened. On January 17, 1893, the Queen of Hawaii awoke up early in her palace in Honolulu. She had spent the day before meeting with advisors and drafting a new constitution for her people. Her name was Lili Ukulani, but she was known throughout the islands as the guardian of the nation. She was a gifted composer, intellectual, and patriot who had fought all her life to protect the rights and interests of Native Hawaiians. Now she needed to put the finishing touches on a constitution that would restore the monarchy and undo many of the wrongs done to her people. But before she could finish, Queen Lili Ukulani would be forced to surrender her throne and her nation. You see, when her brother King Kalakaua died in 1891 during a trip to San Francisco, he left the kingdom in crisis. The ruling class of white, wealthy landowners had stripped the monarchy of power and passed laws that gave themselves total control of the islands. The Bayonet Constitution, as it was called, had taken away the right to vote from most Native Hawaiians. And foreign investors, especially from the United States, were draining the islands of their wealth and natural resources. King Kalakaua had opposed these policies, but he had died before he could enact any real change. So when Lili Ukulani took the throne, she inherited a kingdom that was being held hostage by a handful of wealthy individuals. Determined to undo the damage done to her people, Queen Lili Ukulani reached out to the Native Hawaiians and asked them for their input on a new constitution. She wanted to restore voting rights to native citizens and restore royal authority. But the plans fell into the hands of the Committee of Safety, a group of 13 American and European businessmen and political allies who ran Hawaii. They were terrified. They had come to power by stripping the native Hawaiians of their rights, and they weren't about to give up their power without a fight. The committee wasted no time. At a secret meeting, they agreed that the only way to keep control of the islands was to get rid of the Queen. But they couldn't just kill her. That would cause a riot. They needed to make it look like she was giving up the throne willingly. To do that, they turned to the U.S. Minister John L. Stevens for help. Together, they came up with a plan to remove the Queen and install a provisional government in her place. On January, the leaders of the committee marched down to the palace and presented the Queen with an ultimatum. Either agree to give up the throne, or we'll call on the U.S. Marines to force you out. The Queen was shocked. She couldn't believe that after all she had done for her people, they would turn against her. But she knew that she couldn't fight the committee and their American allies. So she signed the document that made the ultimatum official. With the Queen out of the way, the committee wasted no time in taking control of the islands. They created a provisional government and invited the U.S. Marines to land in Honolulu to protect American lives and property. The Queen watched helplessly as the Marines took over the harbor and arrested anyone who opposed the new government. She knew that she had been betrayed by the very people she had tried to help. As the sun set on January 17, 1893, the American flag was raised over the Hawaiian capital. The coup was complete. The leaders of the committee celebrated with a banquet at the home of Sanford B. Dole, the president of the new provisional government. But not everyone was so happy. The native Hawaiians looked on in disbelief as their queen was forced to surrender her throne. Lily Ukulani felt that the U.S. government would restore justice and help her people. But she soon learned that she was wrong. The provisional government was made up of the same people who had plotted against her, and they were about to give up power. The new constitution they imposed on Hawaii was even worse than the one the king had imposed before. It stripped native Hawaiians of all political rights and gave power to a small elite group of white, wealthy landowners. The queen was eventually forced to leave the islands and live out the rest of her days in exile. She never saw her people again, but she never gave up hope that one day they would win back their independence. The provisional government sent a delegation to Washington, D.C. to lobby the U.S. government to annex Hawaii. But when President Grover Cleveland heard about the coup, he was furious. He ordered an investigation into what had happened and why the U.S. military had been involved. The report, known as the Blount Report, found that the overthrow of the Queen had been illegal and that the U.S. military had played a key role in making it happen. But despite the findings of the report, Cleveland refused to intervene. Instead, he sent a representative to Hawaii to try to negotiate a compromise between the provisional government and the Queen. But the talks failed, and Cleveland was left with no choice but to recognize the provisional government. This was a major blow to the native Hawaiians. They had hoped that the U.S. government would restore the Queen and protect their rights. But instead, their worst fears were realized. The provisional government was here to stay. The leader of the committee that had overthrown the Queen, Sanford B. Dole, went on to become the first president of the Republic of Hawaii. The Republic of Hawaii lasted only 5 years. In 1898, the Spanish-American War broke out, and the U.S. government realized that Hawaii would be an ideal naval base. As a result, Congress voted to annex Hawaii and make it a U.S. territory. The native Hawaiians had lost their country. Today, the story of the Bayonet Constitution is still taught in schools across Hawaii. It is a reminder of the struggle native Hawaiians have faced to maintain their culture and way of life. It is also a reminder of the importance of protecting democracy and civil rights. If you want to learn more about this topic, I recommend reading the book, The Overthrow of the Hawaiian Monarchy by David M. Smiley. It is an in-depth look at this event and its aftermath. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to my channel and give me a thumbs up. Also let me know in the comment section below what you thought about this video. Do you think the U.S. was right to annex Hawaii? Why or why not? I can't wait to read your comments. Until next time, stay awesome. In 1893, Queen Liliuokalani would attempt to restore native Hawaiian sovereignty through a new constitution. The draft document asserted the absolute authority of the monarchy, expanded voting rights to all Hawaiians, and affirmed native title to land. But this bold plan would spark outrage among the foreign elite and lead to an insurrection that ended the Hawaiian kingdom forever. The overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy is one of the most shameful episodes in American history, but it's rarely taught in U.S. classrooms. Instead, we grew up hearing about American missionaries bringing civilization to the heathens of Hawaii, about King Kamehameha uniting the islands, and how a group of sugar barons overthrew the monarchy to bring liberty and democracy to the unsuspecting Hawaiians. But these myths obscure the reality of the Hawaiian kingdom, which was more complex and sophisticated than many Americans realized. And they obscure the story of the overthrow itself, which was planned by agents of the United States and carried out by an insurrectionist force funded and armed by U.S. Marines. To tell this story, I've teamed up with my friends at a digital studio dedicated to telling the untold stories that connect our past to our present. This episode was produced in collaboration with a digital studio and made possible by a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Together, we have brought you this special episode to help us all better understand our shared history. By the mid-1880s, the Hawaiian kingdom was politically fragile. American sugar barons, European merchants, and foreign diplomats increasingly pulled the strings of government. Behind the ornate gates of Iolani Palace, King Kalakaua struggled to balance traditional Hawaiian leadership with mounting outside pressure. His reign was ambitious. Kalakaua promoted Hawaiian culture, built the Grand Iolani Palace, and attempted to forge Pacific alliances. But his vision for a proud, modern and sovereign Hawaii clashed with the economic and political agenda of the American and European elite, who dominated commerce and land. These elites wanted control over trade policy, taxation, land ownership, and most importantly, the right to vote, which many of them had been denied under Hawaiian law. In response, they drafted a new Constitution 1 that would strip the king of power, disenfranchise native Hawaiians, and transfer authority to the wealthy foreign elite. In the summer of 1887, members of the Hawaiian League, a secret society of mostly white American and European businessmen and professionals, confronted King Kalakaua. With armed militias at their backs, they marched into Iolani Palace and forced the king to sign a document they had written. It would become known as the Bayonet Constitution because it was signed under threat of violence. This new constitution greatly reduced the monarch's power, placing executive authority largely in the hands of the legislature and cabinet, required voters to own property, effectively disenfranchising thousands of native Hawaiians and immigrants, granted voting rights to foreign residents, especially Americans and Europeans, allowed the elite to override the king's decisions. Though the monarchy technically remained, it became a symbolic role stripped of real authority. The Bayonet Constitution was a betrayal of the Hawaiian people. It had not been approved by the legislature or the public. It had been imposed by foreign powers, who now controlled the political process. Native Hawaiians were outraged. They organized protests, petitioned the monarchy, and formed resistance movements, like Hui Klai Gina, a political group that demanded restoration of voting rights and royal authority. The Hawaiian Patriotic League, organized to oppose foreign control and support the monarchy across the islands. Hawaiians gathered signatures, thousands of them, calling for the restoration of their rights. but their voices were ignored by the new ruling elite, who now controlled the legislature, judiciary, and military forces. In 1891, King Kalakaua traveled to San Francisco for health treatment. He died there on January 20th, 1891, from kidney disease and stress. His body was returned to Honolulu in a solemn procession. His sister and heir, Queen Lili Ukulani, ascended to the throne. Educated in Western schools, fluent in English and Hawaiian, and a prolific composer, Lili Ukulani was deeply proud of her heritage and determined to protect it. She immediately set to work restoring native authority and rights. Unlike her brother, she was less willing to compromise with the foreign elite. She saw that native Hawaiians had become strangers in their own land dispossessed, silenced, and sidelined. Queen Lili Ukulani's first step was to reassert the power of the monarchy. In her view, the Bayonet Constitution was illegitimate and should be repealed. At the same time, she began reaching out to native Hawaiians across the islands, asking them to support a new constitution that would restore their rights and end foreign domination. Her advisors, however, urged caution. They feared that the foreign elite would use any misstep as an excuse to overthrow the monarchy. So the Queen decided to proceed slowly, quietly drafting a new constitution that would assert native Hawaiian sovereignty. It would require all Hawaiians, regardless of race or gender, to vote for the legislature. It would also reaffirm the absolute authority of the monarchy. The new constitution would need to be approved by the legislature before going into effect. But that posed a problem. Since the Bayonet Constitution went into effect, the legislature had been stacked in favor of the elite. It was dominated by white Americans and Europeans, who would never approve a document that restored power to the monarchy and voting rights to native Hawaiians. So first, the Queen needed to address this imbalance. She appointed several native Hawaiians to the legislature, hoping to build support for her new constitution. But the foreign elite suspected her motives and began arming themselves. The Queen responded by calling for calm and urging restraint. "We are not going to fight," she told her secretary. "I do not want to see bloodshed. We will leave the result to God." But the foreign elite were not interested in peace. In 1893, the Committee of Safety, an organization representing the interests of the foreign elite, warned the Queen not to alter the existing political order. If she did, they threatened, the safety of the monarchy can no longer be our care. Fearing a violent overthrow, the Queen called on the Committee of Safety to mediate. She invited its leaders to Aolani Palace to discuss her constitutional plans. But once inside, she placed them under arrest. Her goal was not to imprison them, but to prevent them from inciting violence. Still, the arrest sent shockwaves throughout the islands. The Committee of Safety immediately raised the alarm, charging that the Queen had launched a coup. Armed militias descended upon Iolani Palace, cutting off water, electricity, and communications. The Queen's ministers raced to contact the militia, but their phones were disconnected. Desperate, she turned to the only person she could think of, John L. Stevens, the U.S. Minister to Hawaii. Overthrowing the monarchy was not part of Stevens's job description. In fact, he was very fond of the Queen. They had met several years earlier when he visited her brother's court, and she performed for him on the piano. But Stevens believed in the supremacy of American power and the superiority of American civilization. He viewed the Hawaiian monarchy as a relic of the past, an obstacle to American progress, and he knew that his government would not lift a finger to defend it. As the militias closed in on Aolani Palace, Stevens made a decision. Leaving the safety of his home, he walked down to the harbor, boarded the USS Boston, and sailed out to meet the Committee of Safety's fleet. On his orders, the Boston opened fire on the Hawaiian ships, forcing them to retreat. With the coast clear, Stevens returned to shore and helped the Queen's ministers restore order. But what seemed like a victory for the monarchy was actually a defeat. You see, word of the uprising quickly reached Washington, D.C., where President Grover Cleveland received it with alarm. The Republican president was already furious with the Queen for overthrowing the Bayonet Constitution, and now he feared that the violence in Hawaii would erupt into a diplomatic crisis. Determined to restore the status quo, Cleveland ordered Stevens to return the islands to the Committee of Safety. And so, on July 6, 1893, Stevens and the U.S. Marines marched into Iolani Palace and forced the Queen to abdicate. That night, she fled to her sister's house, where she spent the night on the floor in her clothes, surrounded by courtiers who had nowhere else to go. The next day, the Committee of Safety declared Hawaii a republic. A provisional government was formed. The U.S. president recognized it, and a delegation headed to Washington to lobby for statehood. The Queen's ministers, along with hundreds of native Hawaiians, petitioned the U.S. Congress to restore the monarchy, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. Lili Ukulani would live another 8 years, spending her days composing music and writing her memoirs, and her nights dreaming of a free Hawaii. The legacy of the overthrow continues to reverberate today. Thousands of Hawaiians still petition for the return of their kingdom, and the debate over land ownership and voting rights remains contentious. Though the Hawaiian monarchy is gone, the dream of self-determination lives on. Mahalo. Thank you for watching this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider making a tax-deductible donation. Queen Lili Ukulani was born into royalty. She was the last monarch of the Hawaiian kingdom, and her story is one of courage and resilience in the face of colonialism. In this series, we bring you the stories of inspiring people from history, people who dared to dream of a better world and fought for justice, equality, and freedom. Join us as we explore their legacies and learn how their stories continue to shape our world today. While many may know about her overthrow, few know that after her imprisonment, she continued to resist, though in a more subtle way. While under arrest, she composed one of her most famous songs, Aloha O. In it, she sings of her grief and longing for her homeland and people. Despite being stripped of her crown, she remains a symbol of hope and resistance against oppression. After her release, she toured the U.S. mainland in the late 1890s, meeting with influential people and pleading for the return of her kingdom. These efforts failed, however, and the Republic of Hawaii was formally annexed to the United States in 1898. Lili Ukulani spent the rest of her life promoting Hawaiian culture and language and caring for her people. She died in 1917 at the age of 79. But why did they want to get rid of her? What did she do to deserve this fate? Well, it turns out that the real reason behind her overthrow was greed and fear of change. Queen Lili Ukulani's boldest move came in early 1893 when she prepared a new constitution, one that would restore royal authority, return voting rights to native Hawaiians and Asian residents, eliminate the property requirements that kept foreigners in power, restore Hawaiian as the primary language of government. The Queen had the support of Hawaiian citizens and Halaiai, the Hawaiian nobility, but her cabinet ministers, many of them white or allied with the business class, refused to sign. They leaked news of the Constitution to the American business community, which panicked. They saw her move not as a return to justice, but as a threat to their economic and political dominance. The wheels of rebellion began to turn. On January 14, 1893, Lili Ukulani publicly announced her intention to proclaim the new Constitution. 3 days later, on January 17th, the Committee of Safety, made up of 13 American and European residents, including sugar magnates, lawyers, and merchants, launched the coup. With the backing of U.S. Minister John L. Stevens, they declared the monarchy abolished and established a provisional government with Sanford B. Dole as president. The U.S. Marines from the cruiser USS Boston were summoned and landed in Honolulu under Stevens' orders, without authorization from Congress. Though they claimed to be neutral, their presence emboldened the conspirators. Outnumbered and unarmed, Queen Liliuokalani surrendered peacefully to avoid bloodshed. On the day of the coup, Queen Liliuokalani issued a formal statement to the U.S. government. "I yield to the superior force of the United States of America and its power to protect the lives, liberty, and property of its citizens in Hawaii. But I do this under protest and for no other reason than to avoid the loss of life. I wish it to be distinctly understood that I hold the U.S. government to the obligations of its good faith, which has been pledged to me and my people, and that the present yielding on my part is made with the understanding that the government of the United States will, as early as possible, restore the Hawaiian monarchy." She believed that President Grover Cleveland, known for his anti-imperialist views, would support her, and for a time, it seemed she was right. When President Grover Cleveland received news of the coup and the Marines' involvement, he was alarmed. He sent James H. Blount, a former congressman from Georgia, to investigate. Blount's report, delivered in July 1893, concluded the overthrow of the Queen was illegal. The U.S. minister had overstepped his authority. The Marines had been used improperly. The provisional government lacked legitimacy. Cleveland ordered that the Queen be restored to the throne, but the provisional government, led by Dole, refused. They declared themselves permanent rulers and ignored the president's demand. Cleveland, lacking congressional support for intervention, backed down. In 1894, the provisional government declared itself the Republic of Hawaii. Sanford B. Dole became president. The Queen remained under house arrest in her palace. Hawaiian sovereignty was, for all practical purposes, extinguished. The new regime cracked down on dissent. Native Hawaiian newspapers were censored. Protests were banned. Supporters of the monarchy were imprisoned. In 1895, a failed attempt to restore the Queen by armed Hawaiian nationalists led to mass arrests. Liliuokalani herself was accused of treason, tried by a military court, and sentenced to imprisonment. She was confined to a single room in Ilani Palace for nearly 8 months. She never returned to power. Though the revolution was crushed, the Committee of Safety sought to ensure that there would be no more revolts. At a constitutional convention in 1896, they drafted a constitution for the new republic. It disenfranchised most native Hawaiians and gave political power to an elite few. Under this constitution, only property owners could vote, and most native Hawaiians did not meet the property requirements. The new government also passed laws to break up large landholdings owned by the monarchy and the church and sell them to private individuals. This was done in order to prevent any one person or entity from having too much power. However, it also resulted in the vast majority of land being owned by non-native Hawaiians. Despite these setbacks, the legacy of the Hawaiian monarchy continues to inspire people around the world. The story of the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy is a reminder of the destructive power of colonialism and the importance of protecting indigenous rights. So what can we learn from the story of Queen Liliuokalani? First, we see the importance of fighting for justice, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The Queen knew that she was taking a big risk when she drafted her new constitution. She also knew that there was a good chance that she would lose her throne if she went through with it. But she was willing to take that risk because she believed that it was the right thing to do. She wanted to restore power to the people of Hawaii, and she was willing to sacrifice everything to do it. Second, we see the importance of standing up for what you believe in, even when others don't support you. The Queen lost the support of many of her own ministers and advisors when she announced her plans to draft a new constitution, but she didn't let that stop her. She knew that she was on the right side of history, and she was willing to stand up for what she believed in, even if she stood alone. Third, we see the importance of never giving up, even when things look bleakest. The Queen lost her throne and was imprisoned, but she never gave up hope. She continued to work for the restoration of her kingdom, even after she was released from prison. Her story is an inspiration to us all. It shows us that it's possible to fight for justice and equality, even in the face of great odds. It also shows us that it's important to stand up for what we believe in, even when it's unpopular. Finally, it reminds us that we should never give up, no matter how difficult things may seem. What are your thoughts on the story of Queen Lily Ukulani? Do you think that the U.S. government was right to overthrow her monarchy? Why or why not? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching this episode. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to like, comment, and share it with your friends. You can also subscribe to our channel to be notified when we release new episodes. We would also like to take a moment to say a special thank you to our supporters, whose names you can see on screen right now. We couldn't make these videos without their generous support. So on behalf of everyone who watches and learns from our videos, we thank you so much. Now, until next time, stay curious. It's the year 1893, and you are in Honolulu, Hawaii. For generations, your ancestors have lived here, yet you know you are not truly at home. You see, you were born into an American colony, part of a kingdom that was seized by the United States. As a child, you heard stories of a time before the U.S. Marines and soldiers came to your islands. You heard of a time when Hawaiians ruled Hawaiians, but those days are gone forever, right? Well, it depends on how you look at it. In 1893, the ruling Queen Lily Ukulani was forced out of power in a coup led by white business owners and missionaries who wanted Hawaii for themselves. But was this really the end of the Hawaiian monarchy? To find out, let's play a game. I've got 6 clues. If you can match them to the correct boxes, you'll win a prize. Not only that, but you'll learn what happened to the Hawaiian monarchy. So let's get started. Clue No. 1. The fall of the Hawaiian monarchy was not marked by open war. No great battles were fought. No foreign general hoisted a victory flag. The kingdom fell in silence through paperwork, politics, and the presence of U.S. Marines. Clue number 2. The last queen of Hawaii was a strong believer in the divine right of kings and the sanctity of treaties. She was especially proud of the Bayonet Constitution, which made Hawaii a constitutional monarchy with an elected legislature. Clue number 3. When the revolutionaries came for her, she did everything she could to resist. But in the end, she was forced to sign a document giving up the throne. Clue No. 4. After giving up the throne, she went to live in a house on the mainland of the United States, where she spent much of her time writing and speaking on behalf of her people. Clue No. 5. She poured her heart out in an iconic song that is still played at sports events today, though few know of its tragic origins. And finally, Clue No. 6. The Hawaiian monarchy continues to be a source of pride for many native Hawaiians today. They believe that one day they will have a chance to vote on whether or not to restore the monarchy. So which clue goes where? Let's start with the first one, the quiet fall of the Hawaiian monarchy. Which box does this clue belong in? The overthrow of the monarchy was not a glorious event. It was the result of months of planning and negotiation between white business owners, sugar barons, and missionaries who wanted more control over the islands. At 7:30 one evening, a group of these revolutionaries arrived at the palace and demanded that the queen step down. Though outnumbered, the queen's bodyguards stood firm, refusing to let the revolutionaries in. They held off the mob for hours, but eventually they were forced to surrender. And so at 9 o'clock that night, the queen was forced to give up her throne. This fits perfectly in box. No. 1. The overthrow itself. But what about the rest of the clues? Let's keep going. Next, we have the clue. She was especially proud of the Bayonet Constitution, which made Hawaii a constitutional monarchy with an elected legislature. Which box does this clue go in? We already know that the Hawaiian monarchy was overthrown in 1893. But how did things get to this point? In order to answer that question, we need to go back a few years. In 1887, the white business owners of Hawaii, called the Committee of Safety, forced the Hawaiian monarch to sign a new constitution that greatly reduced the power of the monarchy. This constitution is called the Bayonet Constitution because it was signed under threat of violence. The new constitution created a system of government in which the monarch had very little power. Instead, most of the power was given to a group of white business owners who were called the oligarchy. The Bayonet Constitution made Hawaii a constitutional monarchy with an elected legislature, but it also limited the power of the monarchy and gave more power to the white business owners. This was a major change for Hawaii, and it set the stage for the overthrow of the monarchy in 1893. The Bayonet Constitution was a key piece of legislation that helped to lead to the overthrow of the monarchy. It limited the power of the monarchy and gave more power to the white business owners. This created tension and resentment between the monarchy and the white business owners, which ultimately led to the overthrow. So this clue belongs in box 2, along with any other clues that talk about the lead up to the overthrow of the monarchy. Moving on to clue no. 3. When the revolutionaries came for her, she did everything she could to resist. But in the end, she was forced to sign a document giving up the throne. Which box does this clue go in? We already know that the Hawaiian monarchy was overthrown in 1893, and that the Bayonet Constitution contributed to the overthrow. But what exactly happened in 1893? What was the lead up to the overthrow? Well, in January of 1893, a group of white business owners and missionaries led a revolt against Queen Liliuokalani. They were angry over the Queen's plans to rewrite the Constitution and restore power to the monarchy. The Queen resisted the revolt, but after 5 days of fighting, she was forced to give up. The revolutionaries then set up their own government and invited the United States to annex Hawaii. President Grover Cleveland opposed the overthrow, but his efforts to restore the monarchy were unsuccessful. On July 7, 1894, the Republic of Hawaii was officially annexed by the United States. This fits perfectly in box 1, along with our first clue, since this is the overthrow itself. But what about the remaining clues? Let's keep going. Clue no. 4 tells us, after giving up the throne, she went to live in a house on the mainland of the United States, where she spent much of her time writing and speaking on behalf of her people. Where does this clue belong? After the Queen was forced to give up her throne, she went to live in a house on the mainland of the United States. There she spent much of her time writing and speaking on behalf of her people. She wrote a book about her experiences and traveled around the country giving speeches. She was a strong advocate for the restoration of the monarchy and the rights of native Hawaiians. But despite her efforts, the monarchy was never restored. The Republic of Hawaii was officially annexed by the United States in 1898. So this clue goes in box 5, the time after the monarchy was overthrown, along with clue no. 6. Speaking of clue no. 6, the Hawaiian monarchy continues to be a source of pride for many native Hawaiians today. They believe that one day they will have a chance to vote on whether or not to restore the monarchy. Where does this clue go? Despite the overthrow of the monarchy, the Hawaiian monarchy continues to be a source of pride for many native Hawaiians today. They believe that one day they will have a chance to vote on whether or not to restore the monarchy. This clue belongs in box 5, along with clue no. 4, since it talks about what happened after the monarchy was overthrown, and continues to talk about the monarchy today. Now we only have 2 boxes left. Where does clue no. 2 belong? Remember that the Hawaiian monarchy was overthrown in 1893 due to growing tensions between the monarchy and white business owners over the Bayonet Constitution. But what was the Bayonet Constitution, and why was it such a big deal? The Bayonet Constitution was a new constitution for the Hawaiian Islands that was imposed on the Hawaiian monarchy in 1887. It was the result of a compromise between the monarchy and a group of white business owners and missionaries who wanted more control over the islands. The Constitution created a system of government in which the monarch had very little power and instead gave most of the power to a group of white business owners. This was a major change for Hawaii, and it set the stage for the overthrow of the Yo monarchy in 1893. The Bayonet Constitution was a key piece of legislation that helped to lead to the overthrow of the monarchy. It limited the power of the monarchy and gave more power to the white business owners. This created tension and resentment between the monarchy and the white business owners, which ultimately led to the overthrow. The Bayonet Constitution is an important part of Hawaiian history because it was a key factor in the overthrow of the monarchy. So this clue goes in box 3, along with any other clues that talk about the lead up to the overthrow of the monarchy. Now we only have one box left. Where does this clue go? This brings us to our final clue. She poured her heart out in an iconic song that is still played at sports events today, though few know of its tragic origins. Which box does this clue belong in? While in exile, the Queen wrote a song about her love for Hawaii. The song is called Aloha O, which means farewell to my homeland. The song is now considered to be the unofficial anthem of Hawaii and is played at all sorts of events, including sporting events. Few people know the tragic story behind the song. So this clue goes in box 5, the time after the monarchy was overthrown, along with clues no 4 and 6. Congratulations, you've won the game. You now know what happened to the Hawaiian monarchy. The Hawaiian monarchy was overthrown in 1893, but it continues to be a source of pride for many native Hawaiians today. If you want to learn more about the Hawaiian monarchy, click here. If you want to learn more about the history of Hawaii, click here. Mahalo. When Queen Liliuokalani prepared to announce her new constitution in January 1893, tension gripped Honolulu. Though she believed she had the moral authority to restore rights to her people, American sugar planters and foreign elites saw her as a threat to their dominance. Behind the scenes, the Committee of Safety, a group of 13 powerful non-native businessmen, plotted to remove her. Their secret weapon? The military might of the United States. U.S. Minister John L. Stevens, a fervent supporter of annexation, acted without orders. On January 16, 1893, he summoned 162 U.S. Marines from the USS Boston and positioned them strategically throughout Honolulu. Though they claimed neutrality, their presence tipped the balance. The Queen's loyal forces were outnumbered and lacked arms. The sight of foreign troops on palace grounds was a silent but devastating message. Resistance would bring violence. On January 17th, the Committee of Safety proclaimed the monarchy abolished and installed a provisional government led by Sanford B. Dole. Queen Liliuokalani, seeing no chance for victory without bloodshed, surrendered peacefully. Her only condition, that the United States later correct the injustice. The coup had succeeded, not with Hawaiian will, but with American steel. On January 24th, a delegation of 4 white men arrived at the palace bearing an ultimatum. Signed by the Committee of Safety, it gave the Queen 2 choices. Either accept a constitution that curtailed her power, or face armed rebellion. This ultimatum was more than a threat. It was an introduction to a takeover plan that had been months in the making. The leader of this plot was a man named John L. Stevens. As the United States Minister to Hawaii, he was Washington's top representative on the islands. But his true loyalty was not to his country, but to the sugar barons of the Committee of Safety. Ever since the Reciprocity Treaty of 1875, American business interests had grown increasingly dominant in Hawaii, and when the Queen attempted to assert her authority, they saw it as a threat to their wealth and way of life. Stevens fanned their fears, claiming the Queen planned to install a dictatorship. His solution was drastic: annex Hawaii and incorporate it into the United States. But to do this, he needed force. Hawaii in the 1890s was not a U.S. territory. It was an independent kingdom, true, its future was uncertain. Its population had been decimated by diseases brought from Europe. Its economy was dominated by foreign-owned sugar plantations, and its ruling class was split between those who favored annexation and those who wanted independence. But it was still sovereign. So when Stevens decided to orchestrate a coup, he took a big risk. He did not have the authority to use U.S. military force on a foreign nation, and if his action became known, he would be recalled and likely impeached. So he acted in secret. With the help of a handful of confidants, he organized a landing party of U.S. Marines and prepared to strike. It all came down to January 16, 1893. On that day, Stevens sent word to the captain of the USS Boston that he needed Marines to protect American lives and property. Fearing for their safety, Captain Charles P. McVeigh dispatched 162 sailors and Marines under Lieutenant Colonel William A. Nickerson. They seized the strategic positions around Honolulu, including the waterfront, post offices, telegraph stations, and the Royal Palace itself. All told, the Americans controlled 6 of the most important buildings in the city, but they did not fire a single shot. That night, Stevens hosted a dinner for the Committee of Safety, sharing news of the Marines' arrival. The coup was on. Next morning, January 17, 1893, the Committee of Safety met and declared the monarchy overthrown. They announced the establishment of a provisional government headed by Sanford B. Dole, a wealthy planter and former judge. The committee also issued a proclamation calling for calm and order, but the Hawaiian people were not placated. More than 10,000 of them gathered outside the palace gates, demanding the Queen's return. The coup leaders expected unrest, but not this level of opposition. Undeterred, the committee turned to the U.S. Marines for protection. That evening, Colonel Nickerson received an urgent request to guard key buildings against potential attacks. Suddenly, the Marines found themselves in the middle of a political crisis. They were not there to enforce a coup, only to protect American interests. But now they were safeguarding the very government that had ordered them to come. In effect, they had become instruments of a foreign policy that many Americans, including President Grover Cleveland, would later condemn. The situation grew tense in the following days. Rumors spread that the Hawaiian patriots planned to storm government buildings and force the Queen's restoration. Colonel Nickerson prepared to defend key installations, but he never got the chance. On January 24th, the Queen made her move. At 4:30 am, she issued a proclamation announcing a new constitution that would restore voting rights to native Hawaiians. The next day, she planned to swear in a new cabinet and read the Constitution to the public. In effect, she was launching a counter-coup, but the coup leaders had anticipated this move. On January 23rd, a delegation of 4 men had delivered their ultimatum. 2 days later, the Queen awoke to the sound of armed Marines outside her bedroom window. She had no choice but to surrender. At 10 a.m., she signed an agreement ending the monarchy and establishing the provisional government. In exchange, she stipulated that the United States would later restore her kingdom. The coup leaders celebrated, but not for long. Queen Lili Ukulani had laid down one crucial condition. The United States must correct the injustice done to her people. That meant either restoring the monarchy or annexing Hawaii and incorporating it into the United States. The die was cast. The question now was which side would win. The first years of the coup were the most turbulent. The provisional government faced mass protests, both native and foreign, over the deposition of the Queen. The Hawaiian people felt betrayed. The coup had been sold as a necessary evil, a means to prevent a native dictatorship. But behind the scenes, the real motive had been exposed: land. Many whites also disapproved. The coup leaders were branded traitors to the United States. Even the President of the United States, Grover Cleveland, demanded the Queen's reinstatement. But the coup leaders refused, arguing that they had no choice but to act. In June 1893, Cleveland sent James G. Blaine to Hawaii to investigate. His report, known as the Blount Report, confirmed that the coup had been illegal. But before the United States could act, the coup leaders struck back. They sent their own delegation to Washington, D.C., led by Sanford B. Dole. Dole argued that the Hawaiian people favored annexation and that the United States should seize the islands before other world powers did. Surprisingly, this argument found receptive ears. Many in Congress favored annexation. The Republican president and most senators were from pro-slavery states, and a majority of representatives hailed from industrial or commercial interests. Annexing Hawaii would open up new markets for their investments and provide a strategic outpost in the Pacific. Moreover, with the economy booming and anti-slavery sentiment waning, the timing seemed right. In July 1894, Congress passed the Newlands Resolution, accepting the illegal fruits of the coup and annexing Hawaii to the United States. President Cleveland vetoed the measure, the first time in history that a president had vetoed an annexation bill, but Congress overrode his veto. In August, Hawaii officially became part of the United States, but the struggle over the islands was far from over. For the next 30 years, Native Hawaiians resisted annexation, demanding the restoration of the monarchy. Groups like Hui Aloha Gina emerged, mobilizing thousands of Native Hawaiians to fight for their homeland. They collected over 38,000 signatures on the Q petition opposing annexation. But their efforts were not enough. In 1898, the U.S. went to war with Spain. The Hawaiian Islands were immediately placed under martial law, suppressing any dissent. The following year, the U.S. military drafted a new constitution for Hawaii, cementing its status as a U.S. territory. Monarchy was gone for good. Today, the story of the Hawaiian coup is little known outside of Hawaii, but to the native Hawaiians, it remains a painful chapter in their history. It was a moment when their culture, identity, and sovereignty were stolen. It was a reminder that sometimes the greatest threat to a nation is not an invading army, but a handful of rogue diplomats and soldiers. As we look back on this dark chapter in history, we are reminded of the importance of protecting democracy and the rule of law. The overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy was a blatant violation of these principles, and it is a cautionary tale of what can happen when unelected officials take matters into their own hands. But it is also a story of courage and resilience. In the face of this grave injustice, the Hawaiian people stood up and fought for their rights. They may not have won in the end, but their struggle is an inspiration to us all. The Hawaiian coup is a reminder that the path to democracy is never easy. It takes courage, determination, and a willingness to stand up for what is right, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Let us remember the lessons of this story and work to ensure that such a travesty never repeats itself. Thank you for watching this episode. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to my channel. I'm a historian. I've written several books about early modern world history, including the Hawaiian Revolution, and I'd like to thank my supporters for their support. Your generosity makes it possible for me to keep bringing these videos to everyone for free. This is Hawaii. This is Pearl Harbor, and this is why the U.S. invaded Hawaii. So in 1893, a group of businessmen overthrew the Hawaiian monarchy with the help of U.S. Marines and established a provisional government. But despite this, Hawaii was still part of the United States. And the question is, why did the U.S. wait another 5 years before annexing Hawaii? Well, that's what we're going to find out. Plus, we're going to look at how the U.S. took control of Hawaii and what happened next. So stay tuned. So in 1896, the tides began to shift when William McKinley won the presidential election. Now, while his predecessor Grover Cleveland was against imperialism, McKinley was all for it. In fact, he said this about the United States: "There is a destiny that makes these United States what they are, an object of worldwide interest." And so with the election of McKinley, the door to annexing Hawaii was open once again. Then in 1898, the Spanish-American War broke out, and this war underscored the strategic value of Hawaii. See, the U.S. was fighting in the Philippines, and its Navy needed a place to refuel and resupply. And Hawaii was the perfect place because it was closer to the Philippines than any other U.S. port. And so, at this point, President McKinley asked Congress to annex Hawaii. He said, "The distance from the eastern coast of the United States to the nearest point of the Philippine Islands is more than 16,000 kilometers. There is no possible way of supplying the troops engaged in those islands with the means of subsistence and the munitions of war unless we have a controlling influence in the islands of Hawaii." Now, Congress agreed with him and passed the Newlands Resolution, and on July 7, 1898, Hawaii was annexed by joint resolution without a treaty and without a vote from Hawaiians. Then the U.S. flag was raised over Honolulu, and the monarchy was dead. The islands were now in American territory. Now, after Hawaii was annexed, the U.S. would raise the American flag over the overthrown monarchy in front of an estimated crowd of 2,000 Hawaiians. And there was absolutely no joy in their hearts. You see, the people of Hawaii had already accepted the loss of their independence 5 years earlier. And so, while the annexation was not exactly popular, it was not a surprise either. And there are 3 reasons why the U.S. invaded Hawaii. No. 1. Coercion. If you remember, the U.S. Marines played a significant role in the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy back in 1893. And by 1898, the U.S. had a big military presence in Hawaii. And so when it came time to annex Hawaii, the U.S. used its military might to pressure the Hawaiian people into submission. Number 2, business. The business interests in Hawaii were largely in favor of annexation. They wanted the economic and political stability that came with being part of the United States. And finally, 3, destiny. Many Americans believed that it was their God-given right to rule over Hawaii. They saw themselves as a superior race, and they believed that it was their duty to spread Americanism around the world. So with all that said, let's get into how the U.S. took control of Hawaii. So in the aftermath of the Spanish-American War, Hawaii was officially organized as a U.S. territory in 1900 with the Organic Act. And the first thing that the U.S. did was institute a system of racial segregation. The white planter elite who had overthrown the monarchy were now in complete control of the government, and they used their power to create a society that was divided along racial lines. But there was actually some good news during this time. In 1900, the Committee of 100, which was made up of prominent citizens from Hawaii, drafted a constitution for the territory. And this constitution provided for a more representative government. However, this constitution was rejected by the U.S. Congress because it granted suffrage only to those of native Hawaiian, Chinese, Japanese, and Korean ancestry. So basically, they rejected the Constitution because it didn't give voting rights to white Americans. So in response, the U.S. Congress passed the Newlands Resolution, which officially made Hawaii a U.S. territory. And this led to the next phase of Americanization, which was designed to wipe away all traces of Hawaiian culture and replace it with American culture. This process began with language. You see, in 1896, English was declared the official language of government and education. And then in 1906, Hawaiian language instruction was banned in public schools. Schools also began celebrating American holidays instead of Hawaiian holidays. And traditional Hawaiian practices were replaced with American ones. For example, the ukulele was replaced with the piano as an instrument of learning. And then traditional Hawaiian games were replaced with baseball. Even place names were changed. For example, the name of a mountain called Mount Kalawao was changed to Mount Baker, and the name of a harbor called Hanakapiai was changed to Portlock. And this brings us to our final point, which is the legacy of the Marines. So remember how I said that the U.S. Marines played a significant role in the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy? Well, that's true. But many historians argue that the Marines' role was more significant than that. They say that the Marines' presence in Hawaii established a precedent for how the U.S. could use military power to achieve its foreign policy goals. And this has been borne out by history. Since the Spanish-American War, the U.S. has intervened in countless coups and regime changes around the world. And the Marines have been at the center of many of those interventions. For example, in 1904, the Marines played a key role in overthrowing the government of Nicaragua. And in 1953, they helped to overthrow the government of Iran. Now, I'm not saying that the Marines are bad, or that all interventions are bad. I'm just saying that the Marines' role in Hawaii established a precedent for how the U.S. could use military power to achieve its foreign policy goals. And that precedent has been followed many times since then. In fact, when the U.S. overthrew the government of Iran in 1953, the CIA director at the time said this: "The Marines did it in Hawaii. We can do it in Iran." And so the legacy of the Marines in Hawaii is a complicated one. On the one hand, they helped to overthrow a government and install a new one. On the other hand, they established a precedent for how the U.S. could use military power to achieve its foreign policy goals. Now, ultimately, I'll let you decide what you think of the Marines' role in Hawaii. But there's no denying that it's a significant part of the island's history. You know, when the USS Boston's Marines marched silently through the streets of Honolulu, they were greeted by an estimated crowd of 2,000 Hawaiians. And the silence was deafening. The Hawaiians knew that their kingdom was effectively over, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The Marines had guns, and they weren't afraid to use them. And so the Hawaiians simply stood by and watched as the Americans took over their country. Today, many native Hawaiians view the overthrow not just as a political event, but a cultural and spiritual trauma. The Marines' role in the overthrow is seen as a symbol of how their kingdom was taken, not through conquest, but coercion. And the memory of that day is still fresh in the minds of many Hawaiians. So now I want to ask you, what do you think of the Marines' role in the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy? Do you think it was justified? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. So after the Marines arrived in 1893, they were there to stay. And in 1898, the U.S. formally annexed Hawaii, and the Marines were there to stay. And today, there are still American military bases in Hawaii. The Marines left in 1946, but the Army and Air Force stayed behind. And if you want to learn more about that, you should check out my video where I explore the truth about why the U.S. military is still in Hawaii. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss an upload. And if you want to watch more of my videos, you can do so here. Hawaii, the 50th state. If you look at a map of the United States today, it has 50 states within its borders. But did you know that wasn't always the case? And one of those states almost didn't make the cut? After World War II, Hawaii's strategic military importance was undeniable. The island served as a vital base for American operations in the Pacific. Meanwhile, the demographic and political landscape was shifting. By the 1950s, Hawaii had a diverse population, including native Hawaiians, Japanese, Chinese, Filipinos, Portuguese, and mainland Americans. The economy had diversified beyond plantations, with growth in tourism, military, and service sectors. Native Hawaiians and other residents pushed for full political integration and rights. Statehood was seen by many as a way to gain representation in Congress, federal funding, and civil rights protections. However, statehood was controversial. Many native Hawaiians felt that the annexation was illegal and that full integration under U.S. law could erase their sovereignty and cultural identity. After years of lobbying, a statehood referendum was held in 1959. Over 93% of residents voted in favor, and Hawaii officially became the 50th state of the United States on August 21st, 1959. But not everyone was happy about this, and there were some pretty big changes coming up in the next few decades. So let's see what happened when Hawaii became a state and how it changed America forever. The road to statehood was a long one. Early efforts in the late 19th century failed due to racial and economic divisions and opposition from mainland politicians. After World War II, the territory's delegate in the House of Representatives, Joseph Taylor, reintroduced the issue, gaining support from returning veterans who advocated for equal rights. Public hearings were held, and in 1950, President Truman asked Congress to schedule a plebiscite on statehood. However, the resolution failed in the Senate. Undeterred, Hawaii's leaders continued to press for recognition. A major turning point came with the 1953 defense buildup, which included establishing the Philippines as a U.S. state. This raised concerns about overpopulation and potential military draft. Mainland Americans began to support statehood as a way to ensure civilian control over the military. With growing support, Hawaii's non-white population became a key factor. Some mainland politicians worried that admitting a non-white state would upset racial balance. But the tide was turning. The GI Bill of Rights, which provided educational and employment benefits to veterans, helped break down racial barriers. Hawaii's strategic value and the changing demographics of the United States made it increasingly difficult to deny statehood. Finally, in 1959, a statehood referendum was held. Over 93% of residents voted in favor, and Hawaii officially became the 50th state of the United States. On August 21, 1959, as Hawaii transitioned into a state, several challenges emerged. The first challenge was balancing the interests of the diverse population. Hawaii's population was and remains incredibly diverse, including Native Hawaiians, Japanese, Chinese, Filipinos, Portuguese, and mainland Americans. This diversity enriched the culture, but also created complexities in terms of representation and interests. Leaders had to work to ensure that all groups felt heard and their concerns were addressed. Economic disparities also posed a significant challenge. While tourism and the military were growing sectors, Native Hawaiians often faced economic disparities. The state had to find ways to diversify the economy, create more job opportunities, and address income inequality. Land use was another contentious issue. Hawaii's unique natural environment and limited land resources led to conflicts over land use for development, conservation, and cultural preservation. Finding a balance between economic growth and environmental protection was crucial. Hawaiian sovereignty was also a persistent challenge. Many Native Hawaiians felt that the U.S. annexation of Hawaii was illegal and sought greater autonomy or even independence. The state had to navigate these calls for sovereignty while also working to integrate Hawaii fully into the United States. So what were some of the early successes and failures in addressing these challenges? Well, one early success was the establishment of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands in 1920. This department was created to manage trust lands for the benefit of Native Hawaiians and provide them with homes and economic opportunities. It is one of the largest land trusts in the United States, and it has helped to preserve a significant amount of Hawaiian culture. However, there have also been failures along the way. For example, the state's efforts to address income inequality and create economic opportunities for all residents have not been very successful. Despite some progress, Native Hawaiians still face higher poverty rates and unemployment rates than the national average. And the state's growing dependence on tourism has left many residents feeling like they don't have much control over their economy. Another example of a failure is the state's handling of Hawaiian sovereignty claims. Despite numerous referendums and votes, the issue of Hawaiian sovereignty remains unresolved, and many Native Hawaiians feel that their concerns are not being taken seriously. The state has also been criticized for not doing enough to protect the environment and for allowing overdevelopment in some areas. This has led to concerns about the impact on Hawaii's unique ecosystems and natural beauty. However, the state has taken some steps to improve the situation. In recent years, Hawaii has made some progress on these issues. For example, the state has invested in renewable energy sources and implemented policies to protect the environment. It's also made efforts to promote cultural preservation and language revitalization. The state has also made efforts to address income inequality and create economic opportunities for all residents. These efforts have not been perfect, and there's still a lot of work to be done. But they are a step in the right direction. But it wasn't just the state government that was affected. Hawaii's statehood also had a profound impact on the United States as a whole. First, it led to increased military spending. As we mentioned earlier, Hawaii as strategic value as a military base was critical during the Cold War, and the state received significant investment in military infrastructure. This had both positive and negative effects on the local economy and environment. On one hand, it created jobs and brought in revenue. On the other hand, it also led to environmental damage and the displacement of native Hawaiians. Hawaii's statehood also had an impact on American society. The admission of a non-white state challenged racial norms and helped to advance the civil rights movement. The growing diversity of the United States led to a greater acceptance of different cultures and ethnicities. Hawaii's unique culture and history also had a broader impact on American society. The state's focus on preserving its native culture and language inspired similar movements across the country. Hawaii became a popular destination for tourists from the mainland, which helped to boost the state's economy, but also had an impact on the local culture and environment. So overall, Hawaii's statehood was a complex and controversial issue that had a profound impact on the state, its people, and the United States as a whole. While there were challenges along the way, the state has made some progress in addressing the issue of Hawaiian sovereignty and promoting economic opportunity and environmental protection. Only time will tell what the future holds for the Aloha state. What do you think? Was it right for Hawaii to become a state? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out my others about the fascinating history of the 50 states. We're just getting started here, and there's a lot more to come. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Thanks for watching. Did you know that the United States of America has illegally occupied the state of Hawaii for 125 years? It was July 1898 when an armed force of about 2,000 U.S. troops took control over the Hawaiian Islands. This event, known as the Hawaiian Overthrow, remains a controversial topic in American history, often overshadowed by the Spanish-American War that was happening at the same time. The American takeover of Hawaii is one of the most significant events in the history of the state. But what makes it so controversial? And why do some people still want independence for Hawaii today? That's what we're going to talk about today. This is the story of Hawaii, the beautiful island's paradise that has been struggling for freedom for more than a century. Before we get started, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell icon to stay updated with our latest videos. Hawaii, a collection of volcanic islands in the Indian Ocean, is renowned for its breathtaking natural beauty. Prior to its annexation by the United States, Hawaii was an independent and thriving kingdom with its own distinct culture and way of life. The Hawaiian Kingdom was formed in 1795 when the warrior chief Kamehameha the Great unified the independent island chiefdoms through a series of strategic battles and alliances. Under his leadership, the kingdom flourished, becoming a constitutional monarchy with a written constitution in 1819 and gaining international recognition from European powers. The Hawaiian Kingdom's strategic location in the Pacific Ocean made it a valuable trading partner, attracting merchants and missionaries from the United States, China, and other parts of Asia. The economy thrived on agricultural exports such as sugar, coffee, and fruit. However, despite its success, the Hawaiian Kingdom faced challenges. The influx of missionaries and foreign settlers led to social tensions and the introduction of diseases to which Hawaiians had no immunity. By the late 19th century, the Hawaiian Kingdom was in decline, facing economic difficulties and pressure from foreign powers, including the United States, which sought to expand its influence in the region. The arrival of American missionaries in Hawaii in 1820 marked a significant turning point in the history of the islands. While some missionaries aimed to convert Hawaiians to Christianity and abolish slavery, they also introduced new systems of education and governance that would have a lasting impact on Hawaiian society. The establishment of schools and churches became focal points of American influence, shaping Hawaiian culture and values. The efforts to suppress traditional Hawaiian practices and the growing presence of foreign settlers contributed to a sense of cultural displacement among the native population. The introduction of Western medicine and the decimation of the Hawaiian population due to diseases like smallpox and measles had a profound impact on Hawaiian society. The loss of life not only devastated families and communities, but also eroded the cultural and social fabric of the islands. By the mid-19th century, the Hawaiian Kingdom found itself in a precarious position. The death of King Kamehameha V without an heir led to a succession crisis that was exploited by American and European interests. When the Hawaiian League, backed by U.S. business interests, forced Queen Liliuokalani to abdicate the throne in 1893, it was the beginning of the end for the Hawaiian Kingdom. The reasons behind the overthrow are complex and intertwined, but the key factors include the desire of white business interests to gain control over the Hawaiian economy, the influence of American missionaries and settlers who sought to impose their cultural norms and values, and the strategic importance of Hawaii as a naval and commercial outpost for the United States. The immediate aftermath of the overthrow saw the establishment of the Republic of Hawaii, a provisional government recognized by the United States. However, this period was marked by political instability and uncertainty as various factions, including the Committee of Safety, the Hawaiian League, and the indigenous Hawaiians, competed for power. The debate over whether Hawaii should become U.S. territory or remain independent intensified. Meanwhile, the United States' decision to annex Hawaii was influenced by several factors. The strategic value of Hawaii as a naval and commercial base, the potential economic benefits of the islands, and the desire to expand American influence in the Pacific Ocean played a significant role. Annexation was seen as a way to protect U.S. interests and counter the growing power of other nations in the region. In 1898, the United States officially annexed Hawaii, incorporating it into the U.S. as a territory. This marked a significant shift in Hawaiian history, ending its status as an independent nation and placing it under direct American rule. The annexation was a controversial move that raised questions about colonialism, imperialism, and the rights of indigenous peoples. It sparked debates in the U.S. mainland, with arguments over whether Hawaii should be admitted as a state and how it should be governed. The period following annexation brought significant changes to Hawaii. The U.S. government implemented policies to integrate the islands more closely into the American political and economic system. These policies included the introduction of new laws, the establishment of new institutions, and the promotion of American culture and values. At the same time, the relationship between the U.S. mainland and Hawaii became increasingly interconnected. Trade, transportation, and communication networks were expanded, fostering greater integration into the broader American market. Hawaii's strategic importance as a military and naval base was recognized, leading to the establishment of key installations that would shape the island's role in national defense. Despite its natural beauty and strategic value, Hawaii's journey since annexation has been marked by challenges. The overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy and the subsequent annexation by the United States had a profound impact on the islands, bringing about significant changes in governance, culture, and society. While Hawaii has progressed in many ways, issues of land ownership, cultural preservation, and economic disparities continue to reflect the lasting effects of these historical events. After the illegal coup in 1893, Queen Liliuokalani, the last monarch of the Hawaiian kingdom, was forced to abdicate. Her efforts to regain the throne were unsuccessful, marking the end of the monarchy in Hawaii. The Queen's legacy, however, continued to inspire movements for independence and self-determination among the Hawaiian people. Her story serves as a symbol of resilience and the enduring spirit of the Hawaiian kingdom. Following the overthrow, a provisional government was established with Sanford B. Dole serving as president. This government sought recognition from the United States and paved the way for Hawaii's eventual annexation. Dole's role in this process remains a controversial topic, seen by some as a champion of Hawaiian independence, and by others as an agent of American imperialism. As Hawaii transitioned into a U.S. territory, it faced a series of challenges related to land ownership, labor practices, and cultural change. The large estates created during the plantation era resulted in a concentration of land in the hands of non-native owners, often at the expense of native Hawaiians. The introduction of foreign plant species also had ecological consequences, disrupting the delicate balance of Hawaii's native ecosystem. Additionally, the suppression of the Hawaiian language and culture under U.S. rule led to a decline in native Hawaiian identity and pride. The question of statehood for Hawaii gained momentum in the mid-20th century, with proponents arguing that it would provide greater political representation and economic benefits. However, the path to statehood was a long and complex one, involving negotiations, referendums, and debates over representation. In 1959, Hawaii officially became the 50th state of the United States, marking the end of its status as a territory. This event was the result of decades of political efforts, cultural activism, and changing perceptions of colonialism. The road to statehood brought both opportunities and challenges as Hawaii navigated issues related to land rights, economic development, and cultural preservation within the context of U.S. federal policies. Today, the debate over Hawaiian independence and sovereignty continues. Proponents argue that statehood was imposed on an unwilling population and that native Hawaiians have been marginalized on their own land. They seek recognition of historical injustices and call for greater self-determination. However, others argue that statehood has brought stability and prosperity to the islands, and that independence would disrupt the close ties between Hawaii and the U.S. mainland. The struggle for Hawaiian independence reflects a broader, global trend of decolonization and the desire of indigenous peoples for self-determination. Hawaii's unique history and cultural heritage make it a compelling case study in understanding the complexities of colonialism, cultural resilience, and the ongoing pursuit of justice and recognition. In conclusion, the American occupation of Hawaii is a dark chapter in history. Despite its natural beauty and cultural richness, Hawaii has suffered under U.S. rule, but the spirit of aloha endures. The island's fight for freedom continues, seeking justice and recognition. Hawaii's story is a reminder of the importance of respecting cultural diversity and the right of all people to self-determination. As we look to the future, let us honor the legacy of Hawaii and work towards a world where all nations are free and all cultures are respected. Thank you for watching this episode. Please share your thoughts, feedback, and comments below. Your engagement is very important to us. If you like this video, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Also, make sure to watch our other videos that we know you will enjoy. Did you know that the U.S. occupies an archipelago of islands in the Indian Ocean? If you guessed Hawaii, you'd be right. But why are these islands a part of the United States? Why did they become the 50th state? And how do their indigenous people feel about their current situation? To answer these questions, we must travel back in time to the year 1893. The Hawaiian Islands had been inhabited by Polynesian, voyagers for over 1,500 years before European ships arrived in the early 19th century. By the 1820s, American missionaries had arrived, and the Hawaiian nobility was starting to adopt Christianity. King Kamehameha II, who had succeeded in uniting the various independent Hawaiian kingdoms into one, was even converted. He died in 1867 and was succeeded by his granddaughter Liliuokalani, who reigned from 1891 until her abdication in 1893. During her reign, the Hawaiian Islands became an economic asset to the United States due to its production of sugar. Sugar planters, most of them white Americans, became very wealthy and began to resent the taxes imposed on them by the Hawaiian monarchy. They also didn't like that the king had appointed non-white members of the nobility to key government positions. So in 1893, the Committee of Safety, which was composed of white sugar planters, staged a coup d'etat with the support of U.S. Marines and forced the Hawaiian monarch to abdicate. But don't worry, the U.S. wasn't involved in this at all. After the deposition of the Hawaiian Queen, the Committee of Safety wrote a constitution which severely restricted voting rights and made the islands a republic independent from the monarchy, but heavily reliant on the United States, both economically and militarily. This new constitution was called the Bayonet Constitution because it was written at the point of a bayonet. The committee also invited U.S. Marines to occupy the islands and protect the provisional government from any potential monarchist uprising. And to make sure no one thought that this was actually a Hawaiian government, they even put up a sign saying, "For the United States of America." In 1894, a group of white Americans led by Sanford Dole formed the Provisional Government of Hawaii, which was committed to annexing the islands to the United States. A treaty was signed in 1898, but the U.S. Senate never ratified it. For a while, the islands remained a republic, but the U.S. still had a large military presence there. In 1900, a small group of native Hawaiians and some sympathetic white Americans pushed for the restoration of the monarchy, but they were unsuccessful. In 1941, the U.S. finally annexed Hawaii, making it a territory of the United States. It would remain a territory until 1959, when it was admitted to the Union as the 50th state. For many native Hawaiians, this process of deposing their monarch, losing their land, and being annexed to another country has caused deep resentment. When Hawaii became a state, it was with the provision that the U.S. would manage all of its natural resources. This meant that the native Hawaiians lost control over their lands and natural resources, which were taken over by the U.S. government and foreign corporations. Many Hawaiians have fought to regain control over their lands and natural resources ever since. But it's not just about land rights. It's also about cultural survival. Over the years, the U.S. government tried to suppress Hawaiian culture, language, and religion. For example, Hawaiian was replaced by English in schools, and many Hawaiians were forced to convert to Christianity. However, in recent decades, there has been a revival of Hawaiian culture. The Hawaiian Renaissance of the late 20th century saw a renewed interest in traditional Hawaiian music, dance, and language. There are now laws in place to protect the Hawaiian language and culture, and organizations like the Office of Hawaiian Affairs work to preserve and promote Hawaiian culture. Despite these efforts, however, many Hawaiians still feel the effects of colonization. For example, only about 20% of Hawaiians speak the language fluently, and there is still a significant achievement gap between Hawaiians and other Americans. Despite these challenges, the Hawaiian people continue to fight for recognition of their rights and sovereignty over their own land. This history reminds us that empires don't have to be built through war to be powerful. Sometimes they can be built through economic influence, legal manipulation, and strategic military presence. And it also reminds us that indigenous people are often the ones who suffer the most from empire building. However, it is also a testament to the strength and resilience of indigenous peoples that despite all they've been through, they continue to fight for their rights and recognition. The Hawaiian people are a great example of this. They continue to fight for their land, culture, and sovereignty, despite centuries of oppression. What do you think? Should Hawaii be its own independent nation again? Or should it remain a U.S. territory? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching.